Hey friends, before we dive into tonight's story, did you know that nearly 80% of viewers aren't subscribed? If you're enjoying this content, hit that subscribe button. It really helps keep these long stories coming. Also, for even more police horror stories, check out my new channel. The link's in the description and pinned comment. I'd love it if you stop by and subscribe. I'd love to hear from you. What time is it where you are and which city are you listening from tonight? Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into it. I can still hear the crackle of the radio. 12 to 10:23. Check on Elmwood Terrace 219. Neighbors report loud banging and a scream, no other details. It was April 14th, 2008. It was just past midnight. My partner Reyes had left Route 9, turned onto Oak Street, and we were driving toward Elmwood on a deserted country road lit by a few street lamps. The Interceptor's heater hummed softly, and the engine's idle pulsed as if it were starting up again. The damp spring chill outside filled the cabin with every breath, and with each exhalation, a misty line blurred the windows. We turned on the ceiling lights. We glided quietly past the neat houses of the suburb. Most of the windows were dark. A few curtains moved slightly as if someone inside was watching us. Reyes reached for the radio and said in a low, steady voice, "Roger, dispatch. Unit 12 is en route to 219 Elmwood Terrace. Roger, Unit 12. ETA 4 minutes, came the reply, that crackling, mechanical dispatcher voice. We sat in silence as the patrol car moved forward, both of us watching the rhythmic flash of the red lights in the rearview mirror. I glanced down at my uniform. My shirt was spotless, my badge polished, my gun in its holster. But I felt a growing unease inside. My stomach was churning. Something was wrong with this call. "Have you ever gotten a 10:23 call and nothing came of it?" I asked, still keeping my eyes on the road. Reyes shook his head silently, still focused on the road. "Never. But if there wasn't a real need for help, dispatch wouldn't have made the call." The road to Elmwood curved gently through a stand of maples. Their branches arched overhead, forming a tunnel of shifting shadows as our cruiser passed beneath. The only sound was the rolling tires and the steady tick of the turn signal. I flipped on my flashlight and clipped it to my belt, the metal cool against my hip. A final street lamp flickered and died as we turned onto Elmwood Terrace. The street ended in a cul-de-sac surrounded by trim lawns and stillness so complete it felt like scenery painted onto black velvet. Number 219 sat at the far end, a two-story craftsman with dark siding and white trim. The porch light was on, casting long diagonal bars of illumination across the lawn. The windows on the second floor were shuttered, but on the ground level I could just make out movement behind the glass. "Let's check the front," I whispered to Reyes. He nodded. Together, we killed the cruiser's engine and stepped into the night. My boots crunched on the gravel driveway. The air tasted of damp earth and new bloom. Somewhere behind us, a loose gutter downspout rattled in the breeze. I clicked the radio to silent and held my breath, moving toward the porch. Reyes rang the doorbell. 1 ring, 2, no answer. The door itself was locked, but I saw no sign of forced entry. No splintered jamb, no pry marks around the lock. I tapped on the glass. The silhouette inside tensed, stepped back. Then, muffled, "Police? Ma'am, are you okay?" A curtain twitched, and the shape retreated. Then hands slid the deadbolt open. The door cracked inward. A woman's voice, tight and trembling. "Officer, thank God." I squeezed through, Reyes close behind. The foyer was dimly lit by the porch light. Wallpaper of pale blossoms peeled in one corner, and dust motes drifted in the beam of my flashlight. A framed family portrait sat askew on a small table. A man, a woman, and a boy, perhaps 8, smiling beneath the weight of sunshine. I crouched and straightened the frame. The woman, Mrs. Caldwell, stood behind Reyes, clutching the front of her bathrobe. Her eyes were wide, glassy in the low light. "Mrs. Caldwell," Reyes asked gently, "we got your call." She swallowed, trembling. It's my husband. I heard him screaming upstairs, then banging, and I thought he might be hurt." My jaw tightened. "Can you show us where?" She nodded, voice quavering. "Upstairs, but be careful." We ascended the narrow stairs together. The carpet underfoot was worn in the middle, fibers matted flat by years of foot traffic. I flicked my flashlight's beam along the handrail. At the landing, the hallway stretched left and right, 3 doors, all closed. Silence pressed in around us, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs. The banging had stopped. A chill drifted down the corridor. I called softly, "Mr. Caldwell? This is the Pelham County Sheriff's Office. Are you okay?" No reply. I moved to the first door on the left, bedroom. Knocked, shoulder checking. It was locked. I tried the handle, locked tight, but I flicked the lock with a knife extricated from my belt. The door opened, revealing a neat room. Bed made, clothes hung in the closet, nothing out of place. Next door, the bathroom. Same. The tub was full of water, running cold, and the sink faucet dripped methodically. I crouched, checking for footprints on the tile. None but ours. The third door at the end of the hall, the master bedroom. I signaled Reyes to cover the corridor. My hand tightened on the door handle. I counted to 3, then pushed in. The room was in chaos. The bedspread lay tangled on the floor. A dresser drawer hung open, empty. The nightstand lamp was shattered, glass shards peppering the carpet. And at the far wall, the window was wide open, curtains whipping inside out in the breeze. Through the opening, cold air moaned into the house. I shone the light toward the center of the room. A dark shape slumped against the wall, a man's legs, pants soaked dark. I approached, gun drawn but held low. "Mr. Caldwell?" I asked. His head lolled forward. I saw the dark stain on his shirt, his chest rising in short, gasping motions. Bruises ringed his neck and wrists. His eyes fluttered open, glazed. He tried to speak. Only a hoarse rasp came. Reyes called into his radio. "Unit 12, we've got a male down. He's conscious but unresponsive. Possible assault victim." I checked the window frame. Splinters suggested a forced entry, but the sill was too high. He couldn't have climbed out easily, not in his weakened state. I knelt beside him. "Sir, can you tell me what happened?" He tried again. "They upstairs." His voice trailed into a strangled cough. "What upstairs?" He lifted a shaking hand, pointing across the room. I turned. The closet door at the far end was ajar, dark inside. The only sound was his labored breathing and the wind through the busted window. Reyes joined me, shining his flashlight on the closet. Inside, clothes hung motionless, a narrow space beyond. A rack of coats peeled back, revealing a small opening in the wall, an access panel. Footprints and dust dusted the floor inside the closet, leading into the hidden space. I swallowed. My radio crackled. "Unit 27 on scene." Backup lights cast a pale glow through the broken window. I stepped toward the closet, heart pounding. The air inside that panel was cold and stale, like a tomb. "Check it," I said to Reyes. He nodded, hefted his light and wriggled through the gap. The panel creaked. I heard his breathing slow, then hitch. "What is it?" I whispered. A moment later, he backed out, pale-faced. "Office, come look." I shined my beam inside. Beneath the floorboards was another board, pried loose. Inside the cavity were scraps of paper, torn journal pages, stained. Scrawled lines slanted across them. Half-legible sentences about watching, waiting, and a final line repeated on each: "No one can escape the sound of trembling walls." I slid a gloved hand over the page, careful not to smudge the ink. The words felt raw, desperate. A muffled thump resonated above us, like someone had jumped on the floor. Reyes leveled his light at the ceiling. "Above this room," he said quietly. I looked at Mrs. Caldwell standing in the doorway to the hall. She sank to the floor, covering her face. He came through the ceiling," she sobbed. "I heard him crawl. I thought it was a dream." I stood, taking in the battered room, the opened window, the hidden vent, and those torn pages. My pulse pounded in my ears as the wind rattled the broken glass. Somewhere above, floorboards shifted again. Backup officers arrived behind us, sweeping the hallway, checking rooms. Their lights danced across the walls. I radioed dispatch. "Unit 12 to dispatch. Evidence found. Request for K9 and warrant. Suspect may still be inside structure." Seconds later, voices above, footsteps padding on the attic floor. We all froze. A distant thump, then silence. I moved to the shattered window, peered out at the cul-de-sac. The night lay still beyond the houses, as if nothing had happened. But behind me, in that ransacked bedroom and beyond in the hidden crawlspace, something was watching us. I backed out of the master bedroom slowly. Every muscle taut, flashlight and sidearm both aimed at the half-opened attic hatch above. The others were moving too. Officer Ruiz knelt beside the torn journal pages in the closet cavity, whispering into his radio a terse evidence update, while Reyes and 2 backup units fanned out across the hallway. The wind rattled the broken window pane as though the house itself trembled in fear. My partner stepped back, pointing to the ceiling. A single floorboard had shifted, its edge lifted slightly, revealing a dark slit that led into the attic space above. "Better get that K9 up here," Reyes muttered, glancing back at me. The others nodded, already fumbling their straps and cuffs, prepping the K9 team for entry. But I hesitated. Every protocol screamed at me to secure perimeters and wait for the dog, yet instinct pulled me toward the hatch. My hands felt slick with sweat as I climbed the narrow ladder that Reyes held against the wall. Above me, the attic gaped, a yawning void draped in shadows so thick they swallowed the beam of my flashlight almost entirely. I inched forward, boots landing on dusty planks that moaned under my weight. The scent of mildew and old insulation clung to the air. As my eyes adjusted, I made out the bare bones of the attic. Exposed rafters, stacks of forgotten cartons, lengths of old plywood leaning against the wall. Footprints, 6-inch, mud-caked imprints, lined the dusty floorboards, heading toward the opposite end. I crouched to examine them, tracing their pattern. Deliberate, steady, almost patient. Whoever had been here moved with purpose, as if they'd known this layout intimately. A sudden thump echoed behind me. My heart skipped. I spun around, pistol raised, light darting back the way I'd come. The hatch was covered again. Someone or something had pushed the board back in place, concealing the entry. My boot kicked it free, sending a spray of dust motes into the beam. I peered through the gap. Nothing. The rickety ladder stood empty. Beneath, the hallway lay silent, officers waiting. Their lights blinked like distant stars in the gloom. I radioed, voice tight, "Unit 12, suspect access point secured. K9 team proceed." "Copy that," came the reply from K9 Unit 45. Within moments, I heard the cadence of paws on floorboards, the handler's low whisper guiding the German shepherd up the ladder. The dog's breath was a soft rasp in its collar. It paused at the hatch, staring into the attic, toenails clicking. I shone my light past it, illuminating a narrow path between stacks of cartons. The prints continued in that direction. "Go on, boy," the handler coaxed quietly. The dog slithered across the rafters, nose to the ground, ears tipped forward. I followed, careful not to break the fragile boards. Each step released a faint creak that sounded thunderous in the silence. We reached a small open area where the roof's peak met a triangular window shuttered shut. The dog whined, pacing, then pawed at a loose slat. I pried it open. Cold night air rushed in, smelling of damp leaves and distant road dust. I aimed my light outward, but saw only darkness. Behind me, the dog gave a short bark, low and cautious. I turned. Next to a battered steamer trunk lay something half hidden in shadow, a length of frayed rope, stained dark at one end. It had been looped around an old beam and cut loose. I holstered my pistol and picked it up, my gloves brushing over the coarse fibers. The stains felt tacky. I lifted the rope toward my face, studying its roughness. That rope had bound Mr. Caldwell's wrists. It had crossed the attic floor here, and now it lay discarded, an abandoned witness. "Evidence," I said softly, clipping it to my belt. The dog moved to my side, bristle of fur against my hand. It whined again, a soft complaint. I patted its flank, then turned back to the prints. We followed the path toward the far wall. There, hidden behind a stack of dusty painting canvases, was another panel, like the one in the closet. A hand-drawn arrow pointed downward, scratched into the wood. A crude symbol, like an open mouth, etched hastily. I knelt, aimed my light, and pried the panel loose. Inside lay more scraps of that same journal, torn, water-stained pages covered in frantic handwriting. I pulled out the top sheet, careful not to tear the brittle paper. A single line stood out. "The sound of sleeping keeps them safe until the walls tremble." Beneath it, another scrawled sentence, "I test the night." A distant crack reverberated through the rafters, like a board giving way. The dog stiffened, hackles rising. I slammed the panel shut and stood, flashlight swinging around. The attic felt alive, as though it watched us with invisible eyes. I drew my radio mic again. "Unit 12 to dispatch. Found hidden crawlspace leading to a secondary chamber. Request tech team and additional units for containment." "Copy. Unit 12. ETA 6 minutes." I climbed out of the attic and back down the ladder, landing with a jarring thud that rattled my spine. Reyes and the others were waiting, eyes fixed on me. I handed the rope and journal pages to Ruiz, who began bagging them. The handler released the dog, which patted down the ladder and shook out its coat, amber eyes glinting. "Floorboards gave way up there," I said, voice low. "This house was modified. 2 hidden tunnels, one here and one behind that closet. Someone's been using this place to watch them, to hide from search parties." Reyes rubbed his forehead. "But why the Caldwells? Why move him upstairs, lure his wife into calling?" I shook my head, tasting dread. "To me, it looks like ritual. He's testing them, breaking their sense of safety. And this journal, he's chronicling every moment. He wants someone to find it, to hear his words." Below us, the medical team was loading Mr. Caldwell onto a stretcher. He was shivering, eyes wide, but he recognized me, whispered he was in the walls, above my bed. His voice cracked. He listened. I crouched so I was level with him. Fell's shaking gripped me, not from cold, but from something darker, rage, guilt, a shiver I'd felt only once before. standing over a broken trunk on Elmwood Terrace. "You're safe now," I said. But I didn't believe it. Back in the foyer, I found Mrs. Caldwell still standing by the front door, robe wrapped tighter around her. She met my gaze. Her eyes were hollow, lips trembling. He was my husband's friend," she said in a whisper, voice thick with horror. "He visited last week, said he wanted to check on us." My breath caught. "Do you know his name?" She nodded, tears slipping down. Michael Hargrove." I felt my heart drop. Hargrove, a local handyman who'd worked on their roof last autumn. A quiet guy, no record of violence. Yet here, under the surface of that unremarkable life, lay something malignant. I radioed dispatch again. "Unit 12. Possible suspect ID, Michael Hargrove. Last seen at this address a week ago. Request urgent BOLO on Hargrove." The wind rattled the broken window as if in response, a low whistle that ran down my spine. Somewhere above, in those hidden crawl spaces, I felt eyes on me. The attic hatch above the foyer rattled once, like a mistake, then stayed still. I turned to Reyes. "We'll sweep the property again, but make no mistake, we're not done. He's here, somewhere." Reyes nodded and raised his flashlight. We moved back toward the hallway, sealing off doors, checking closets, every dark corner. The tension clawed at us, silent but unrelenting. As I passed the nursery door, I paused. The crib mobile still spun gently in the breeze, plastic animals creaking softly. I shone my light at the wall behind it. There, scrawled faintly in graphite, "Listen for the sound of broken trust." I swallowed. That line settled across my mind like a warning. The truth was, the Caldwells' home was no longer theirs. It was the killer's domain, staged for terror, and though we'd found blood-stained rope and torn pages, and even identified a suspect, the house still pulsed with his presence. We'd locked down the perimeter, sealed every possible exit, but I knew it wasn't enough. Because some houses don't keep out intruders, they harbor them, and some prey know how to vanish even when the walls themselves tremble with their movement. As backup flooded the scene, I stepped outside to call for forensics and the tactical unit. The cul-de-sac lights had flickered back on, casting a hesitant glow over the lawn. The surrounding houses stared back, reflective and lifeless. A neighbor peeked from a window, concern etched across his face. I gave him a curt nod, then returned inside. In the living room, Ruiz was dusting for prints. Reyes checked the kitchen, flashlight beam dancing across a row of cabinets. I entered the foyer again, past the crooked family portrait. The ticking of the dropped refrigerator, like a distant clock, counted out each second. And still, the house whispered, creaking floorboards, distant thumps in the attic, half-heard laughter carried on the breeze through that broken window. I closed my eyes, inhaled the humid air. I felt hollow inside, as though something vital had been carved from me during that crawlspace discovery. The house had claimed a piece of my mind, and I knew I'd carry those slivers of darkness with me long after I left. The forensic team arrived, and I handed them the journal pages, pointing out the scrawled symbols. As they began photographing the scenes, I slipped outside once more, heart pounding in rhythm with the dropping night air. I needed a moment of clarity, just me, the crisp breeze, and the distant hum of squad radios. But out there on Elmwood Terrace, beneath the unaware gaze of suburban lights, I felt exposed. Each shadow seemed to recede, only to grow larger, more intent. And I realized Michael Hargrove wasn't simply a man with a twisted mind. He was someone who understood fear at its core. Someone who knew how to walk inside your walls and never be seen. someone who could linger long after you thought you were safe. They brought Mr. Caldwell out moments later, eyes downcast. His wife followed, clutching his arm, stepping over the threshold into the cold night. The breeze lifted the hem of her robe briefly, revealing bare ankles trembling against the gravel. I walked beside them, silent, offering only a steady presence. I glanced back at the house. The front door hung open, a dark mouth waiting to swallow more secrets. The attic window glowed faintly as if someone stood there watching us go. Mrs. Caldwell stopped at the edge of her lawn. She turned to me, tears glinting on her cheeks. "Please, make sure he can't come back." I nodded, voice low. "He won't, ma'am. We'll find him." But as I watched them drive away in the ambulance, siren off, the tension I'd felt inside the house followed me. It settled in my gut, cold and unyielding. In that moment, I understood that some predators leave more than bruises and broken boards behind. They leave a stain on your sense of safety that you can't wash out. I stood alone in the cul-de-sac, cruiser idling behind me, lights off. Maple and Elmwood stretched silent in the early morning gloom. I touched the worn leather collar of my radio and whispered into it, though no one was listening. "Tell me this ends tonight." But I already knew it wouldn't, because in the dark, hidden corners of that house, something had set down roots. Something that watched, listened, and waited. And when the walls themselves trembled, it would slip through again, hungry for the sound of trembling hearts. The morning light was a thin smear of gray when the tactical team rolled up in their armored Bearcat, its matte paint absorbing the pallid dawn. I watched from the cul-de-sac, hands stuffed into my coat pockets, the collar turned up against the chill. Uniformed officers milled about, boot heels clicking on the pavement, while crime scene techs continued photographing and bagging evidence from the house. The journal pages and stained rope had been logged and secured in clear evidence bags. The photos of the attic, the closet crawlspace, and the scribbled symbols coated my partner's tablet. Yet, none of it had quelled the tension that clung to my shoulders like soaked wool. Captain Evans approached, his face drawn and pale under the unlit streetlight. He carried 2 steaming cups of coffee. He handed me one. I took a grateful sip. Bitter, black, hot enough to burn. "What's the latest?" he asked quietly. I exhaled slowly. Forensics found partial fingerprints on the attic later that match Hargrove's prints on file. Canine didn't pick up a fresh scent inside the walls, so he's likely left the house. But no sign of forced exit. No one saw him leave. Evans nodded. "He's clever. Local handyman, knows the property. Knows how to slip between walls undetected. He probably exits through the crawlspace in the basement." I frowned. "There's a basement?" I thought back. I'd never gone that low. The house felt bottomless. I didn't see a basement entry. He turned to the front porch. Old houses like this sometimes have a hatch under the kitchen rug or hidden behind false panels. We need to find it. If he stayed in the upper crawl spaces all night, he's probably holed up somewhere else now. I drained the last of my coffee and tossed the cup aside. The crisp rim of dawn painted the tops of the maples silvery. The breeze had died. A single crow called from an elm. "Let's find that hatch," I said. Inside the foyer, Mrs. Caldwell stood wrapped in a blanket, hugging herself. Her eyes were pink-rimmed. A detective gently explained that they'd be filing charges against Michael Hargrove for breaking and entering, assault, and whatever else they discovered. She nodded numbly, lips pressed tight. I gave her a formal nod, professional distance, but in truth, I wanted to tell her it wasn't over, that the house still held its breath for Hargrove to re-emerge. Reyes and I cuffed up and groaned down the basement stairs, following the techs. The steps were narrow, wooden, descending into dimness. My flashlight beam caught the rough concrete walls streaked with damp. At the bottom, a hatch lay wedged behind an old trunk. The techs had pried it loose and set it in the corner. I knelt beside it, brushing aside dirt and dust. "This leads outside?" I asked Reyes. He peered down at it. Probably to a side exit or crawl space. Could even lead under the porch. I pulled on the rusted ring. The hatch creaked open, revealing a sloping tunnel lined with stone blocks. A faint, earthy smell rose. I swept my light across it. It stretched a few feet before curving out of view. "Get the hazmat suits," I said, "and a K9 unit for subterranean search." Moments later, 2 officers in coveralls and masks stepped into the basement. One handled the dog, which sniffed eagerly at the tunnel's lip. The handler clicked to the dog, "Search!" The dog vanished into the tunnel. Pause, then a sharp bark. The handler followed. I and Reyes exchanged looks and descended. Concrete walls closed in. Water dripped, echoing in slow metronome. My boots slid on slick stone. A dim red light on the handler's helmet bobbed ahead. "Up ahead," the handler said, voice muffled. "I got something." We rounded a corner and entered a small chamber. The dog stood at attention, hackles raised. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw a battered suitcase, straps broken, lying on the dirt floor. Its lid lay open, hinges torn. Inside, bits of clothing, stained dark. Fabric scraps I recognized from Mr. Caldwell's bathrobe. My heart thumped. "He's been here," I said. The handler lifted a gloved hand and pointed deeper into the dark tunnel. Footprints in damp earth led beyond the chamber. The dog sniffed at the marks and whined once. I holstered my pistol, knelt, and examined the prints. They were fresh, showing a hurried pace. Above us, the house creaked. I felt it through the stone ceiling, a distant murmur of wood shifting. "We're on his trail," I said, standing. "Let's move." We advanced through the tunnel. The dog led, nose low to the ground. My flashlight's beam sliced through the darkness, illuminating rough stone walls that narrowed the path. The tunnel curved downward, damp air growing colder. My breath misted. I caught a faint metallic smell, blood, old and stale. Then the tunnel ended at a rickety ladder leading upward. I climbed, boots scraping metal rungs. At the top, I emerged into the kitchen pantry. Shelves lined the walls, dusty dishes stacked neatly as if ready for use. The pantry door was ajar, frame splintered. Someone had crawled out in a hurry. Reyes and I cleared our throats. I radioed, "Unit 12, located subterranean exit in pantry. Suspect has escaped onto ground level. Sweep the block." Outside, backup cruisers formed a perimeter. The neighborhood had woken. Curtains twitched as curious residents peered through windows. Officers with rifles and flashlights moved into lawns, scanning under porches and behind hedges. I lingered in the pantry's gloom, listening. The hum of police radios. The low whine of the dog outside, searching. But then, another sound, almost inaudible. Something scraping inside the pantry walls. I shone my light at the far corner. A loose panel in the wooden sheathing rattled. I braced my shoulder and kicked it closed, dust puffing out. Behind it was another crawl space, one neither Mrs. Caldwell nor the search teams had known. I kicked the panel again. It splintered. My sidearm drawn, I pried it open fully. Inside, a dusty nest. Newspapers bunched in a corner. An old transistor radio, a pair of glasses cracked across one lens, all covered in soot and grime. I picked up the glasses. The frame was bent, but I recognized the style. Hargrove's. I slipped them into evidence gloves and bagged them. The radio crackled, but no station came through, just static and distant laughter that sounded too human. I froze, listening. The static resolved into a whisper. They found me. I bolstered my grip on my pistol. Reyes. He turned, flashlight off. The pantry was dark now, only my beam dancing across jagged panel edges. Did you hear that? He nodded slowly. The radio, but it's not plugged in anymore. I extinguished my flashlight and listened. The laughter rippled again, further down the pantry wall, like someone speaking from inside the house's bones. The hairs on my neck rose. I felt the presence before seeing it, a breath in the crumbly wallboard. Without warning, a board shifted behind me, clacking loose on the floor. I spun, gun raised, but there was nothing. Only the empty pantry and the loaded shelves. I lunged forward, prying the wallboard free. Behind it, half hidden, was the silhouette of an old service doorway, no larger than 2 feet tall. Dirty hands had scrawled on it, "Come closer. I can't reach you through walls." The door was latched from my side, hinges rusted. I unhooked the latch with gloved fingers and eased it open. Cold air spilled out, smelling of earth and rot. But beyond, I caught something far more sinister. Footprints in dust leading toward the dining room, where a single chair sat in the center of the rug, facing the window. The early sun shone in through smeared glass. I saw a dark stain on the cushion, fresh, vivid. I radioed for backup again. Unit 12. Suspect trail reconvened in dining room. I'm going in. Reyes stayed by the door, covering me. I stepped through the service doorway, my pistol raised, flashlight beaming. The dining room felt like a stage set. The chair stood alone, abandoned glass on the table beside it, half empty. A wine stain trailed across the placemat, as if someone had fretted over it. The dog's faint barking echoed in the kitchen beyond. I noticed the dining room's walls were pocked with small holes. Peepholes, I realized, drilled at eye level. At each eye hole, a scrap of fabric was pushed through, plastering the rooms with dark cloth that flapped slightly in the air currents. I moved closer to one. Behind it, another crawl space, this one structured more like a gallery, with framed photos of the Caldwell family, each picture scrawled over in black ink to erase faces. A faint click sounded behind me, like a camera shutter. My spine stiffened. The footprints led under the table and onward into the hallway. I paused, inhaled. Something primal recoiled inside me. "Reyes," I whispered. "He's been watching them, documenting every moment." Reyes stepped in, shining his light over the photos. "He turned their lives into his art," he said, his voice deadpan. I straightened, tensing for action. "We need to sweep every inch of this place until the sun's up. No scrap of wall or corner unturned." The doorbell rang, unexpected in the early dawn, and then again, urgent, insistent. I looked to the front door. We'd sealed it. How had someone rung it? Before I could react, the intercom crackled to life in the dining room. A standalone unit that should have been dormant. A raspy voice, unmistakably Hargrove's, whispered, "You think you know fear? Wait until it knows you." Then static swallowed the sound. I froze, pistol raised. The intercom unit's red light blinked. Reyes cursed under his breath. He's wired this house. Audio loops, intercom, he's never left. A door slammed upstairs, as if an invisible hand had toppled it. The floorboards above the dining room groaned. I took a deep, steadying breath. Back into fight mode. Lock it down, call a SWAT team. This isn't just a burglary or assault. It's a trap. Outside, the armored vehicle's engine idled. I radioed dispatch. "Unit 12, suspect is in the house. He's wired the place. We need breach and clear now. I stepped toward the hallway, heartbeat hammering. Somewhere behind those walls Hargrove waited, ready to test the night again. The house exhaled around me, heavy with the weight of every secret passage I'd uncovered. And in that moment I realized this wasn't about catching him anymore. It was about escaping. The assault team's flashbangs detonated in the hallway above, thunderous booms that rattled every rafter and sent plaster dust drifting through the dining room. My ears rang as I pressed my back against the wall, chest tight with adrenaline. Reyes and I crouched low, weapons raised. Through the open archway ahead, I caught a glimpse of silhouettes. Tactical operators moving in formation, shields up, rifles ready. Their movements were precise and silent despite the chaos, practiced choreography born of countless drills. A secondary detonation upstairs signaled their initial breach. Then came the rapid fire of breaching rounds and the guttural command, "Clear! Go! Go!" I radioed dispatch in clipped bursts, relaying updates and coordinating the sweep. But in my mind, the house had become a living maze of whispers and hidden glories, every corridor a trap, every creak a warning. Reyes and I advanced into the hallway. The intercom had fallen silent, leaving only the echo of breaking wood and shouted commands. We passed the doorway to the foyer where Mrs. Caldwell had waited, now empty and dark. The portrait lay on the floor, its glass cracked, frame splintered. The family's faces were still intact but tilted, as though they stared upward at something unseen. "Upstairs," Reyes muttered, pointing to the stairs where operators were already streaming upward. I nodded, then veered to clear the kitchen and living room. The K-9 team's German Shepherd padded ahead of us, nose to the ground, tail low. Occasionally, it halted at a scent trail, paws scratching concrete, handler holding back on the leash. The tunnel we'd found in the pantry ran beneath the living room floor, too. Techs were already lifting a loose board near the hearth. They offered a grim wave. More hidden crawlways, but none led to a person, just empty passages. I scanned the walls as we passed. Shallow holes patched over with plaster but never sanded smooth, the telltale sign of recent repair. The texture was subtly shifted under my flashlight beam, dimples betraying the work. Someone had tried to conceal every entrance he'd used, reboarding the walls before he vanished. The living room's Victorian mantelpiece bore a tarnished pocket watch, its hands frozen at 12:17. I slipped it into my pocket. Evidence, I reminded myself. But then my flashlight beam caught something else. A faint reflection glinting from the circular vent near the ceiling. I angled up. Inside, I saw an imprint in the dust, the pattern of a boot sole, arch-curved, size men's 8. I crouched beneath it, fingertips brushing the grill. It shifted under my touch, loose. I gestured to the tech officer nearby, and we pried it free. Behind it, dark space, rough fiberglass insulation, no ladder, but scuff marks on the inner wall showed where someone had climbed up or down. I replaced the grill, careful not to disturb the prints, then started toward the hallway again. Reyes intercepted me, nodding tense. "They've got 2 teams sweeping the attic, one from each end. No sign of him yet." I exhaled, tension coiling in my gut. "He's not in the house right now," I said, knowing the words tasted hollow. "He's slipping through these walls, using every hidden path. He knows our tactics. He's studied us." Reyes' jaw clenched. "We need to split. You take the east wing, I'll take west. Radio on Channel 5. Update every 30 seconds. I acknowledged and moved to the east corridor, passing the archway to the formal dining room where the chair and the peepholes had been. The breakfast nook lay beyond, fragmented porcelain on the floor. A single mug splintered against the counter. A smear of dirt trailed toward the backyard door. I crouched, tracing the print. Barefoot, the toes splayed, pad depressed into linoleum. I rose and shone my light through the French doors. No sign of movement in the yard except scuffed grass and upturned potted plants. A rifle's crack rang out behind me. Distress or misfire, I couldn't tell. I shouted to Reyes, "What's your status?" But static filled the channel. I sprinted back to the central hall, adrenaline driving me faster than my boots wanted to go. The walls of the stairwell were covered in frantic scribbles. Words shorn from newspaper headlines, pasted one over another, proclaiming panic and chaos. I recognized the words from the basement tunnel. Tremble, watch, break. They formed a collage of madness layered on top of clean paint. Someone had plastered them using bloody fingerprints as adhesive, each strip curling at the edges. I tore one away gingerly, bagged it, then kicked open the stairwell door. Upstairs, the assault team had cleared the master bedroom and adjoining nursery, both empty. The bed stood empty, sheets rumpled like someone had used it recently. On the nightstand lay a single Polaroid, the Caldwells asleep in bed, mouth agape, eyes closed. I recognized the angle. It was taken from within their closet. My blood ran cold, footsteps behind me, rapid, soft. I whirled, firearm leveled. It was Reyes, face pale, breath coming quick. "Nothing in the east wing," he said. "There's a ladder collapsed in the second-story closet, hidden behind clothes. I think it led to another hatch, but it's broken." I processed that, heart hammering. So he used the attic, basement, pantry, dining room, and still slipped out? He looked at me with grim resolve. "Yeah, and the neighbors say they saw a figure slip out the back gate half an hour ago. Dark coat, hood up, head down. He knew the perimeter would close quickly. He planned this." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Then we box the neighborhood, go door to door, perimeter tight." I could feel the adrenaline drain, leaving me hollow. "Call out a BOLO for Hargrove. Notify neighboring counties." Reyes nodded, turning to relay orders into his radio. I watched the assault team methodically check each room, office, guest rooms, attic access, all empty and silent. They left behind footprints and broken boards, but no sign of a Hargrove or his tools. It was as though he dissolved into the house itself, hiding in the gaps between boards and the quiet spaces under floorboards. I stepped into the nursery, pausing by the crib. The mobile hung motionless. I reached out, spinning it half a turn, and listened to the tiny plastic click. My reflection shimmered on the window. Eyes wide, coat undone, mouth set in a hard line. I felt the weight of what we'd uncovered. Ritualistic surveillance, forced entries, twisted taunts, photographic records. Hargrove didn't just break and enter. He curated experiences, sculpted fear as though it were his art. And with each new passage he revealed, he challenged us to find him before he tore another family's sense of safety apart. I stepped back into the hallway, passing a young officer who gave me a nod. I returned it, but inside I was fraying. Commands echoed, bounds set, teams deployed, perimeter lines drawn. It all felt reactive, chasing shadows in a house designed to eat them. Then, through the static in my earpiece, I heard dispatch again. "All units, BOLO issued on Michael Hargrove. White male, mid-30s, approximately 6 feet 1 inch. Last seen heading east on Elmwood Terrace. Approach with extreme caution. Suspect is considered armed and extremely dangerous." I swallowed, rubbing my jaw. "Copy that," I replied, and to myself I added, "Why east? We sealed that end. He must have known we'd do that. He must have planned for it." My radio crackled again. Rescue call, another welfare check elsewhere. I glanced back at the empty house, the shattered doors, the drilled holes, the secret passages. It was a labyrinth designed to protect its architect. And despite every tactic, despite every broken board we'd found, he'd vanished. I holstered my pistol, hands still trembling. Reyes approached. "We'll pick up his trail," he said quietly. "He left something. We just haven't dug deep enough." I nodded, trying to steel myself. "We leave no stone unturned," I said. "We go back in and map every hidden crawlspace, every cable diversion, every drilled hole. And we keep digging until we find him." He clapped me on the shoulder. "Agreed." As the morning sun climbed higher, illuminating the house in harsh reality, we prepared to re-enter. Every detail, each step, each echo, each whispered taunt had to be recorded. But deep in my gut, I knew the real work had only just begun, unraveling the twisted blueprint of a man who turned fear into a dwelling, whose walls hid him better than any door. We regrouped in the cul-de-sac once more, briefing the canine teams and detectives before plunging back into that house of hidden corridors. The morning had brightened, but the trees still cast mottled shadows across the lawn. For all its sunlit facade, 219 Elmwood Terrace felt darker than ever. Captain Evans stood by my cruiser, rolled maps in hand. "We're dividing search teams into quadrants," he said, pointing. "Sector A, basement and sub-pantry tunnels, Sergeant Blake leading. Sector B, ground floor secret panels, Officer Nguyen and K9. Sector C, second floor crawl spaces and closets, you and Reyes. Sector D, attic and roof access, SWAT entry." His eyes met mine. "Cover every inch, no shortcuts." I considered the directives, then stepped up. "Captain, we need to revisit the dining room peepholes, the nursery closet, and the vent near the mantel. Those are his primary observation points. I propose we assign documentation teams there first, secure any remaining fragments, fabric, prints, or ashes." He nodded. "Agreed. We'll deploy Forensics Detail 3 to those locations. You and Reyes lead Sector C." Reyes clapped me on the shoulder. "Ready?" I swallowed and tapped my radio. "Unit 12 moving to Sector C. Reyes, lead the heading." We ascended the stairs again, taking this time the opposite side corridor, a narrow hallway lined with framed diplomas and certificates that once attested to pride and success. Now they stared down at us with an accusatory chill. The second bedroom door, paint chipped, doorknob tarnished, stood ajar. Dust-dappled floorboards lay beneath our boots. Reyes swept the room with his flashlight. Twin beds, toys strewn across the floor, teenage posters peeling at the edges. Against the far wall, a low hatch disguised as a baseboard was propped open by a scrap of cardboard. We exchanged a look. I crouched, peered inside. The tunnel was tight, a crawl space that slanted under the wall. I illuminated its entrance. Stone bricks smoothed by time, mortar crumbling. The air smelled of damp earth and decay. I rubbed the sleeve of my uniform across the lintel, lifting a sheen of dust for collection. Reyes knelt beside me, snapping photos with his phone in forensic mode. "Lot of prints down there," he murmured. "Looks like he's using this for quick moves between rooms." I rose and slip-slided to the master bedroom entrance. The SWAT team had already cleared it, designating it a command post. Charts were tacked to the walls, connecting evidence points with red string like veins. I found the old closet door, where that battered ladder had collapsed earlier. Reyes joined me, pointing to the scuffed floor and broken ladder rungs. "He carved this in afterward," he said, tapping a rung embedded in wood. "See the shape? That's his symbol, mouth open." I crouched, shining my light on a fresh notch in the wood, as though he had carved in the panic of separation. It hung like a scar. From within the closet, the handler's canine barked once, then whined. The dog nosed at the far corner where a small hole had been plastered over. I pressed the wall. It gave under my palm. I pried the plaster with the screwdriver, one yank at a time. Behind it was another panel. This one slid sideways rather than out. I gestured to Reyes, and together we levered it open. The board spun inward, like an eye opening. Inside lay a bundle of clothes tied in rope. Jeans, a flannel shirt, and gloves coated in grime. I recognized the pattern of the flannel, the kind Hargrove wore when he did odd jobs for neighbors. I slid each garment into evidence bags, careful not to upset the creases. "Anything else?" Reyes asked. I turned on my flashlight. The narrow crawlspace narrowed further beyond this nook, sloping uphill toward the attic floor. The wooden boards above pinged with the weight of unseen roof joists. A faint scuffling echoed from above, like gravel shifting on tin. I jabbed my light upward at a small opening. It framed the center of the attic floor like a secret skylight. Dust motes drifted down as if teased by a whispered breath. "We're closing in," I said. "He's getting nervous." Reyes glanced at me, eyes hard. "Then, let's flush him out." I radioed dispatch. Sector C, possible exit tunnel to attic, initiate roof takedown. Moments later, SWAT scaled the exterior wall with ropes and ladders. We could hear the muffled commands above us. Teams converging on roof hatches locked shut. A dull thud sounded overhead as they forced open the metal hatch, prying it free. Then a shout, "Clear!" A door on the attic floor crashed, and the ceiling planks rattled. I braced against the wall beneath the hatch. Splinters rained down as boots landed overhead, gear clinking. The command to breach echoed through the boards. "Ladder up, move in." I and Reyes pounded the closet door shut, sealing the panel behind us. The wooden frame splintered as a ram struck. A battering ram against the hidden panel, hitting again and again. Chips flew and dust settled on our uniforms. "On your signal," Reyes said, eyes locked on the failing frame. I pulled the pin from my fragmentation grenade, standard breaching charge for concealed spaces, and handed it to Reyes. "Place it at the base," I ordered. He nodded and squeezed through the opening. Flashlight in mouth, grenade tucked under his arm. I heard him shift, then the faint click of the pin released. "Cover your ears," he hissed. A muffled bang reverberated in the crawlspace. Board fragments exploded inward, sending a spray of sawdust. Resinous wood dust filled our nostrils. A hand snaked out from the rupture, thin, pale, shaking. It clutched a length of frayed rope. A foot followed, bare, dirty, splayed toes pressed into splintered wood. Then a body writhed free, shoulders scraping against broken boards. It was Hargrove, eyes wide with panic, mouth open in a silent scream. His coat hung in tatters, collar torn. The rope in his hand snapped under his grip. Reyes lunged forward, slam grappling Hargrove's arms. The suspect twisted, jerking free, but he was a step too late. I raised my service weapon in one fluid motion. The barrel hovered inches from Hargrove's chest. "On the ground!" I barked, my voice cracked, raw. The weight of adrenaline made every word echo in my head. He froze, chest heaving, eyes wild. I caught the scent of sweat, damp wool, and something fouler, fear laced with triumph. Reyes pinned Hargrove's arms behind his back, cuffing him. Hargrove spat, "You'll never stop the sound." His voice was a rasp, hoarse and resigned. He smiled then, crooked and empty. "They hear it always. The walls tremble for them." I planted a knee on his back, rifle still trained on him, and snatched out my radio. "Unit 12, suspect in custody in attic crawlspace, Bring medics and evidence tech. As eyes, ours and Hargrove's, met, I felt the house shift beneath me. Floorboards settling, walls contracting. It was a final exhalation, as though the house mourned its master's capture. They hauled Hargrove through the breach, adrenaline court swirling in my veins. I knelt, examining the splintered boards and scattered journal pages that fluttered like forsaken birds. I gathered them in gloved hands, torn entries, cryptic symbols, wash of ink that read as both confession and indictment. Down below, Mrs. Caldwell and Captain Evans watched from the doorway, faces ashen. She whispered my name. I handed her Hargrove's journal page with his scrawl. "He's caught," I said, voice softer now. "He can't hurt you anymore." She nodded, tears falling. "Thank you," she murmured. "Thank you for finding him." I stood, stretched tight like a coiled spring. The house around us lay quiet and empty, its secrets bared. We escorted Hargrove from the attic, past the nursery, down the stairs, through the living room, and out onto the dew-speckled lawn. He was silent until the ambulance arrived. Then, with the crackle of polycarbonate doors, he fixed me with a gaze that chilled my blood. "You hear it now, don't you?" he whispered as they loaded him. "The echo in your head, the whisper in the walls. It belongs to me." I didn't reply. I shut the cruiser door and watched the ambulance pull away, siren off, Hargrove visible through the rear window, mouth moving as if reciting unseen verses. The sun had risen fully by the time the last of the forensic units folded up their equipment and boarded their vans, leaving 219 Elmwood Terrace eerily quiet and still. I stood on the cracked flagstone porch, surveying the aftermath of months of relentless preparation, of piecing together a puzzle laid out in secret tunnels and whispered taunts. The house's siding had been dusted white by plaster and sawdust, its windows taped and boarded over as evidence preservation teams marked perimeter lines in red spray paint. Yellow caution, biohazard tape, fluttered like broken laughter across the hedges. I ran a hand through my hair, the weight of exhaustion settling into my bones. Beside me, Officer Daniels, who'd relieved Reyes on first watch, checked a tablet showing a monumental list of cataloged items. Journal fragments numbered from 001 to 347, lengths of rope, swatches of fabric, boot print casts, shards of plaster bearing Hargrove's fingerprints. Each entry represented hours of work in attics, crawl spaces, and behind walls. Hours that had swept away the mundanity of duty and left behind a grim tapestry of obsession. Behind us, Captain Evans and Detective Morales spoke in low tones. I edged closer, straining to catch snippets. They discussed demolition permits, proposals to raze the house entirely, to eliminate any chance of Hargrove's return. I imagined the walls trembling one last time as wrecking balls pounded through the hidden cavities. It would be cathartic for the Caldwells, maybe, tearing down the man's playground, burning away his words scribbled on paper. But the thought felt incomplete. You can destroy every beam and board, yet the memory of crawling through darkness, hearing scuffs behind every panel, cannot be so easily leveled. I knelt by the front step and let my gloved hand brush across a smear of dried mud. Hargrove's final footprints as he was dragged out in cuffs. The gritty residue sifted between my fingers. I closed my eyes. I could still hear it, the soft rustle of those pages, the creak of floorboards under his weight, the gasping of his voice in tight corridors. My radio crackled. "Unit 12, please advise. Transport team ready to move suspect to county lockup. ETA 10 minutes. I clicked the mic. "Copy. I'll meet them at the Sallyport." As I rose, I caught sight of Mrs. Caldwell standing across the street, wrapped in a blanket and leaning on a neighbor's arm. She watched the house with hollowed eyes, lips pressed together, as though biting back tears or regrets. I wanted to tell her that the nightmare was over, that Hargrove was sealed behind bars, but I also knew she'd carry the tremor of Elmwood Terrace in her bones forever. Every creak in drywall, every gust rattling her windows would echo that night. I crossed the street and approached her slowly. She turned, meeting my gaze. "Officer," she said, voice brittle, "they're tearing it down tomorrow." "I heard," I replied gently. "I'm sorry." She swallowed, nodding once. "He told me he loved these walls. He said they were alive. He'd watch me sleep, he said." I laughed then. I laughed. Her voice cracked. I didn't believe him. I placed a hand on her shoulder. "No one blamed you," I said. "He was—" I paused, searching for the word. Deceptive, he hid his darkness well. She closed her eyes, leaning into my hand. I keep thinking maybe I missed something, a sign, anything. I wished I could comfort her, but what could I say? That Hargrove left hundreds of signs, dozens of symbols, a trail of terror, and still the house felt alive with his presence? I exhaled slowly. "You did everything right. You called us. You saved your husband. That's what matters." She opened her eyes, moisture glinting. "I hope when they tear it down, they find the last of it, the last passage he used. I'll make sure of it," I promised. I left her standing on the sidewalk as I headed back to my cruiser, its door still warm from the morning sun. Inside, Reyes was already seated, scrolling through the in-car computer for updates on Hargrove's booking. He looked up when I approached. "You okay?" he asked. I slid in beside him, buckling my belt. "As okay as I'll ever be," I said, and activated the console mic. "Unit 12 to booking. ETA 5 minutes." We drove slowly through the quiet neighborhood, past purple magnolia trees, heavy, with petals and mailboxes dusted by morning dew. Birds chirped in indifferent greeting. It all felt wrong, too peaceful, too bright. Real life had no business moving on so soon from what we'd uncovered in that house. At the station Sally Port, the transport van sat under the awning, its rear doors open. Hargrove waited inside, head bowed, wrists shackled to his waist, eyes lifted in cold defiance as we approached. The detective handed me a folder containing the inculpatory evidence. Photographs of the hidden panels, castings of footprints, the torn journal pages compiled into a single, fat volume. He looked at me, urgency in his gaze. "We need you to review this with the DA. His timeline matches your detailed search plan. The more we can show premeditation, the stronger the case." I opened the folder and flipped through glossy prints of scribbled scrawls. "I test the night. They tremble under watchful walls." Each page was stained or torn, or both. I pressed a finger to a smear of dried ink. It felt like tracing the edge of madness itself. Reyes caught my eye. "You want to come in on the review?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to return home, to shower off the plaster and the dust, to sleep in my own bed and not wake up in a crawl space. But another part felt tethered to that case, unwilling to let it go. I slid the folder into my jacket. "Yeah, I'll be there." The detective already had his car idling. We joined him, the three of us piling into the back seat. The DA's office was a block away, an imposing brick building crowned with weathered stone columns. As we drove, I stared at the folder in my lap, feeling its weight. It wasn't just paper, it was the blueprint of destruction, the private journal of a killer's torment. The case was far from over. Later that day, I sat in a windowless conference room, fluorescent lights flickering overhead like distant thunderclaps. Across the table, the district attorney leafed through the photographs, his pen tapping impatiently. "These cavities," he said, pointing to a diagram of the attic floor plan. "They're extraordinary. Hargrove must have spent weeks modifying the house." Reyes nodded. He moved freely in those walls, watched every corner. He had a tunnel from the pantry to the dining room, another from the second bedroom to the attic, and one from the basement to the kitchen panel. He built a maze behind the drywall. The DA looked at me. "Your search plan was spot on. Without your coordination, we'd have never found him." I thanked him, but the praise rang hollow. I imagined Hargrove back in his cell, already plotting his next house, his next unwitting audience. When the meeting ended, I stayed behind to gather my thoughts. I stared at the final photo on the DA's desk. A Polaroid of Hargrove inside the nursery, perched on the floorboards, notebook open, writing as the mobile creaked overhead. His expression was intent, focused, as if documenting not just the Caldwells, but my intrusion into his world. I closed the folder. "That's enough for now," I told the DA's assistant. He nodded, gathering the prints. I rose and walked toward the door, pausing for a moment to look back at the blank wall, at the empty chairs. I felt the house breathing through me, an aftershock of fear and fascination. On my drive home, I passed the site where Elmwood Terrace had once stood. A chain-link fence now enclosed the lot. Behind it, demolition crews had already begun their work. A low rumble echoed as a backhoe clawed at foundation slabs, concrete crumbling into gravel. Clouds of dust billowed, momentarily blotting out the morning sun. I pulled over and stepped out. The turbine roar of machinery filled my ears. Bits of plaster and brick tumbled down, revealing the husk of the house, its secret passages collapsing inward. The walls I'd combed inch by inch were reduced to rubble, and I half expected to see Hargrove himself emerge from the dust, choked by his own labyrinth. But there was only silence. The backhoe operator, helmeted and distant, glanced my way before swinging the arm again. A final wall segment gave way, with a crack like a gunshot, and the attic gable collapsed in on itself. Sunlight streamed into the darkness beneath, a brief, blinding reminder of how light overtakes shadow, though not without leaving its tracks. I stood on the pavement, chest heaving, watching as the house was dismantled piece by piece. Each falling board was accompanied by a hollow moan, a voice in the timber as if saying farewell. But beneath that lament was another sound, low and persistent, a distant whisper that seemed to come from the scattered debris at my feet. I bent and picked up a splintered shard of drywall, its surface marked with a fragment of Hargrove's scrawl. "The walls, remember." I brought it to my nose, inhaling the musty dust. My vision blurred with remembered dread, crawling through tight tunnels, the static-laced intercom laughter, the chill of hidden corners. The backhoe operator paused mid-swing, watching me. I turned and pocketed the shard, then climbed back into my cruiser. I started the engine and drove away, tires crunching over crushed brick and plaster. I never thought a crime scene could feel empty until I watched the last splintered board of 219 Elmwood Terrace fall beneath the backhoe's claw. But when the dust settled and the final wall fragment clattered into the rubble pile, the house was nothing more than a memory incarnate, a ruin of concrete and wood, a desiccated testament to everything Michael Hargrove had built and destroyed. The silent lot stretched before me under a pale afternoon sun, and for the first time since that call came in on Elmwood Terrace, I felt unmoored, untethered from the ground I'd combed inch by inch in search of a predator who had turned innocence into a labyrinth of terror. I parked my cruiser at the edge of the demolition site and stepped out, the gravel biting at my boots. The neighborhood, once a sanctuary of trimmed lawns and porch lights, now bore scars. Broken hedges, flattened flower beds, scattered fragments of memory. Still, children's laughter drifted faintly from a distant yard, life continuing as though nothing had happened. I envied them that innocence. I retrieved the fragment I tucked into my coat. The scrap of drywall inscribed with Hargrove's half-visible promise, "The walls remember." I cradled it in gloved hands and traced the jagged edges with my fingertips. Despite the house's collapse, that message lingered, as though etched into the very air around me. I closed my eyes, inhaling dust and damp earth, and for a moment I could hear it again. The hush of hidden tunnels, the creak of boards under his weight, the brittle pages of his journal fluttering like wings in the dark. A squad car rolled up and parked behind mine, brakes squealing. Officer Daniels stepped out, removing his cap and brushing back sweat-matted hair. He offered a steady nod and held up a sealed evidence bag. Our K-9 team turned up more prints near the garage foundation. Looks like Hargrove did one final check on his retreat. Forensics recommends we catalog them as exhibits. He handed me the bag. Inside, 2 muddy boot soles pressed into a thin film of cement. Each print was unmistakable, the arch and heel shape matching the pattern I'd seen in the attic and pantry months earlier. I slipped the bag into my kit. "Thanks," I said. "At least we can mark the final chapter of his echo." Daniels didn't respond immediately. He just watched the wrecking crew load debris into dump trucks. Then he murmured, "You okay, boss?" His use of boss surprised me. He rarely called me that, even in private. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just thinking." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. My shift schedule, updated with overtime details and debriefing sessions for several officers who were shaken by the case. "Captain wants us back at precinct by dusk," he said. "He also wants you to lead the critical incident debrief." I nodded, folding the scrap of drywall and slipping it into my pocket. "Understood." We climbed back into our vehicles and drove through the quiet streets, engines humming low. Elmwood Terrace receded in my rearview mirror until only its shadow remained. The sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and pinks. I remembered the dispatcher's voice from that first call, calm, professional, unaware of the storm it would unleash. It all began with a simple welfare check. It ended with months of forensic analysis, multiple hidden crawlspaces, a labyrinth of terror, and the capture of a man who wore my uniform like a mask. Back at the precinct, the fluorescent lights welcomed us with weary familiarity. The debrief room brimmed with officers in uniforms rumpled by sleepless nights. Coffee cups lined the table, printed photos of the house and its hidden passages scattered across the surface. Captain Evans stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, shoulders squared. His expression was solemn but relieved, victory tempered by the knowledge of what we'd all endured. As we took our seats, he addressed the room. "I know this case has taken a toll on all of you. You've combed attics, squeezed into crawl spaces, faced a predator who treated a home like his hunting ground. We did our jobs well, no one was killed, and Hargrove is off the streets. But that doesn't mean the toll is gone." He paused, letting the words settle like dust. "Tonight, we'll go around the table. Tell us what you need. Any counseling, time off, anything. We owe you that." One by one, officers shared their stories. Nightmares about narrow tunnels closing in, the feeling of breath on the back of their necks when walls suddenly groaned. The torment of sifting through torn journal pages that chronicled every frightened gasp. Some voices cracked, Others were measured but hollow-edged. I listened, absorbing each account, feeling the weight of every haunted memory as though it were my own. When it was my turn, I cleared my throat. "I'm grateful for the result," I began, voice low. "But I can't shake the feeling that this case didn't end with Hargrove behind bars or the house demolished. The maze he built, that darkness, has become part of how I see walls, ceilings, and floors. Every shadowed corner, every loose panel, it all reminds me that something can hide just beyond the limit of sight." I swallowed. "I need help managing that. I need time away, maybe some leave, maybe some counseling. Because I know I'll be back on duty next week and I can't bring every scrap of terror with me when I do." A hush fell over the room. Captain Evans nodded, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. "You'll get whatever you need. No one is stronger than what they've overcome. If you confront this now, you'll lead the rest to do the same." I exhaled, relief mingling with guilt. I'd taken care of a predator who exploited trust. Now I had to take care of myself. The debrief ended and officers dispersed. I packed my notebook into my jacket. As I turned to leave, Detective Morales approached, holding a digital recorder. "We'll need your statement for the investigative file. One last time. Describe the chase, the labyrinth, the capture." I agreed, dictating the final details of Hargrove's apprehension, my words crisp and measured. When I finished, Morales nodded appreciatively. "Thank you. This completes the record." I stepped out of the station into the cool dusk air. Streetlights glowed on Main Street, and the sky bled into night. I fumbled for my keys, pausing under a lamppost to retrieve them. In the pool of yellow light, I saw my reflection in a storefront window. Dark circles under my eyes, uniform jacket hanging heavy. The shadow of everything I'd witnessed etched on my face. I thought of Elmwood Terrace, its corridors of hidden terror, the echo of pages, the creak of boards, and wondered if demolition had truly buried every secret. I flicked on my cruiser's headlights and slipped behind the wheel. The engine's hum felt suffocating. I pulled onto the road, turning north. The drive home was quiet. My neighborhood, lined with vinyl-sided houses and neatly trimmed lawns, stretched out in sleepy rows. I passed my own front porch, familiar and safe, or so it seemed. I imagined Hargrove's words dancing behind closed doors, waiting to seep through cracks. I test the night. My hand brushed the pocket at my side, where I'd tucked the drywall fragment. I parked in my driveway, engine idling. The night was still, but I could feel the tremor beneath it. I opened the car door and stepped onto the pavement. In the hush, I listened intently. There was no rattling attic, no creaking floorboard, just the distant hum of traffic and the chirp of crickets. My front door loomed ahead, solid, unmarked. I unlocked it and entered, closing it gently behind me. Inside, the hallway was silent. My steps echoed on hardwood floors. I flicked on the living room light, warm, steady illumination, casting every corner in clarity. The walls were pristine, save for framed photos of family vacations and pet portraits. I paused at a blank patch where a painting once hung, long removed, and inhaled. I placed the drywall shard on the mantel beside a brass clock. The grain of the wood mantel was smooth, worn by years of polished care, and I rested my palm on it. For a moment I allowed myself to believe that terror had no residence here, that the walls would not remember. Then, from somewhere deep within the house, behind the laundry chute perhaps, or beneath the laundry room floor, I heard it. A low, indistinct whisper, so faint I thought I might have imagined it. My heart seized. I shut my eyes, tilting my head, straining to catch the words. The whisper came again. "They still tremble for you." I froze, the whisper resonating through bone and blood, as real and cavernous as the crawl spaces of Elmwood Terrace. The walls held their breath. And then, the house was silent once more. I was parked at the edge of Route 42, idling in Cruiser 36, when the call came in just after 0214 hours. Dispatch crackled through the speaker. Unit 36, we have a welfare check request at 1204 Pine Ridge Drive. Elderly resident, no response to welfare calls for past 12 hours. Neighbors concerned. Advise ETAI ease the vehicle forward. Tires humming over wet asphalt, and tap the mic. Copy that, dispatch. ETA, approximately 2 minutes. On Nocta Sekis. The tone in my voice was flat, routine. Rain pattered against the roof in irregular drops, each a pale echo in the stillness. I shifted the gear lever to drive, my partner's coffee mug rattling between my leg and the console. Garcia, who'd been pulling an afternoon nap in the passenger seat, groaned and shrugged awake. "Welfare check," he murmured, rubbing his eyes. He flicked on the overhead dome light and traced the rim of his mug. "Easy night," he said. Too quiet for my liking. I nodded, flipped on the spotlight, and guided the beam through the windshield, illuminating rows of dark houses lined by leafless oaks. Pine Ridge Drive was a narrow, curving lane of split-level homes set on deep lots. Most had single-car garages and modest lawns. Street lamps cast broad, fuzzy halos through the mist, creating pools of dull glow separated by long ribbons of shadow. As we approached number 1204, I cut the siren off, leaving only the small red and blue lights reflecting off slick pavement. The house stood halfway down the block, a pale yellow structure with a peaked roof and a single porch light flickering on its final bulb. The neighbor's motion sensor bulb had kicked on just before we arrived, spilling white light across the front walkway. I killed the engine, unbuckled, and drew my weapon out of habit. Standard protocol for any welfare check when we can't confirm the occupant's status. Garcia followed suit. We moved in tandem toward the front door, boots splashing in shallow puddles. I held the weapon low at a 45-degree angle, eyes scanning everything above eye level. Windows, eaves, trees. Every housing structure could conceal hazards. My every sense was trained on the environment. An instinct born of years driving these streets when the rest of the world slept. The front door was locked. I knocked once, sharp, then twice. The sound reverberated off the vestibule walls and the living room windows. No response. I switched to my radio. "Dispatch, Unit 36. No response at front door. Please advise entry protocol." A few seconds of static preceded the dispatcher's reply. "Go with non-forced entry. Resident is at high risk. Use minimal damage." I acknowledged and reached for my Slim Jim tool tucked in my inner jacket pocket. I slid it between door frame and lock, twisting until I felt the tumblers release. A soft click followed by the faint squeal of shifting metal. The door swung open under my hand. The interior was dim. Only the hallway light was on, casting a weak yellow curve into the foyer. A hall runner carpet covered dull wood laminate. I stepped inside, weapon still raised, flashlight in the other hand. The beam wavered slightly in my grip as I scanned left to right. Family photographs lined the walls, smiling faces frozen in time. A young girl with braces at a school dance. A man in full uniform. The homeowner must have been proud. A uniformed man in his early 60s, the same one we'd come to check on. "Mr. Langdon," I called softly. "This is Officer Bennett and Officer Garcia. We're here to check your welfare." My voice felt unnaturally loud, bouncing against the walls. No answer. I stepped further in, boots echoing on the laminate. The living room furniture was arranged neatly. Sofa by the window, armchair angled toward a small television. On the coffee table lay an open paperback, its pages yellowed. I crouched to inspect. The book rested face down, bookmark still in place. Page 173. The open door outside let in a swirl of cold air. I could almost feel the wind press against my back. Garcia swept his flashlight across the room, its beam catching dust particles dancing in the stale air. "Nothing in kitchen," he said, voice low. I acknowledged. We moved through the living room toward the hallway leading to the back of the house. The muted tick of a wall clock was the only sound. Halfway down the corridor, I noticed the blood pressure monitor on a narrow side table. Digital, reading -- on its display. No power. The plug had been yanked free of the outlet. My heart rate ticked up a fraction. Not panic, just awareness. If Mr. Langdon had needed it and it was unplugged, that meant he'd been conscious recently, or that someone had deliberately torn the plug from the wall. I shone the light across the hallway. Bathroom door closed, bedroom door ajar. I motioned to Garcia, who approached the bedroom with me trailing. Inside, the bed was unmade. Crumpled sheets where no one lay. A walker sat at the footboard, unused. Clothes were draped over a chair. I approached the nightstand. On it, a glass of water, still full, beads of condensation on its surface. I snatched it up, placed it on the table, and checked the floor. Nothing but carpet indentations. No signs of a struggle. I stepped back and signaled to Garcia to take the bathroom. He gave a curt nod. I heard the door click shut. I trained the flashlight at the carpet near the edge of the doorway. No footprints, no drag marks. But then a faint shimmer caught my eye. A small smudge of red on the floral patterned wallpaper. It was a stray drop, no more than a seed of crimson. I leaned in, careful not to disturb anything. It wasn't fresh. Dried into the paint, edges flaking. Garcia's voice came through the door. Nothing but an empty tub and towels on the rail. I exhaled. Copy that. I surveyed the room one more time before moving back toward the hallway. As I turned to leave, something about the open bedroom door made the light shift. The bedroom window at my back rattled. I focused my light there. Raindrops sheeted down the glass, obscuring our view. A flash of lightning illuminated the yard in stark white. For a moment, I thought I saw someone crossing the yard, just a flash, figure hunched over. But the next lightning cast the yard in darkness again. I cleared my throat and spoke into the radio. Dispatch. Negative contact inside house. No sign of resident. All doors and windows locked except front. Suggest canvas perimeter. A click. Roger, Unit 36, canvas in progress. I turned back to the hallway. The roofline overhead was low, the ceiling dingy with age. As I stepped forward, the roof vent above me groaned softly, as if the house itself were settling, breathing. I paused, listening. The static from a distant television filtered through the walls, not playing on any device in this room. Garcia arrived at the doorway. We met there, shoulder to shoulder. We shared a look, professional, restrained. "Oh." Neither of us spoke. Together, we moved toward the basement door, its latch half lifted. The handle looked slick, as if it had been held by a sweaty hand. I reached for it, thumb sliding over cool metal. Underneath, frost had formed, odd in an unheated basement. "You feeling that?" I whispered. Garcia nodded, flashlight tracing downward to the stairs. We descended. Each step dropped us deeper into silence, except for the occasional drip of water echoing somewhere in the darkness. The air turned damp, musty, like a cave. My boots felt heavier on the rough concrete. The walls glistened with moisture. I flicked off the main light switch. Dead. No power. Only our flashlights pierced the gloom. I felt the walls contract. Distance between the stairs and the floor seemed to stretch. At the bottom, we swept our beams across stacked boxes, a water heater, random household cast-offs. Then I saw it. Muddy footprints in the thin dust layer covering the floor. One set, heading toward the far wall. I stepped forward, nearly tripping over a discarded lawn chair. The prints led to the old freezer, its latch stained with rust. I motioned to Garcia. He was pale in the beam's glow. "You sure we've been the only ones down here?" he asked. I shook my head, no. I crouched and inspected the footprints. Too small for my size, too large for a child. Adult male, bare boots, tread pattern unfamiliar. The prints stopped 2 feet from the freezer handle. My pulse hammered. I stood and shone the light on the freezer door. It was firmly closed. I reached out, heart thudding inside my chest, and shifted my weight to pull it open. The freezer door gave way with a groan of aged hinges and a rush of cold air, like the exhalation of something long confined. I steadied my flashlight against the upper edge of the opening and slid one leg inside, boots crunching against frost-rimed metal. Garcia remained at the top of the steps, his beam cutting across the storage area like a searchlight. The freezer's interior was empty of food, just ice-encrusted trays and a jumble of defunct plastic containers. But something else caught my eye. At the back, half buried in frost, lay a yellowing folder stamped Fletcher Herald. I pulled it free with gloved hands, breath pluming as I lifted it into the warmer air of the basement. The folder's edges were brittle, the ink smeared from moisture, but I could still make out the date scrawled in block letters. August 1996. My fingers trembled as I opened the flap. Inside were pages of typed notes, interview transcripts between department investigators and the subject, Harold Fletcher himself, detailing accounts of a break-in in 1996 at this very address. The final entry read like a hurried confession, ending mid-sentence. Mr. Fletcher insists he heard voices in the basement, behind the freezer. He claims the voices called his name. Upon inspection, he found fresh footprints and something. The rest was obscured by a dark stain. Blood, I realized. My stomach clenched. I closed the folder and glanced back at the freezer. The interior frost had melted slightly around the folder's resting place, as if that file had been left there recently enough to warm the surrounding ice. I dropped the folder onto the nearest box and stood, gripping the flashlight so tightly my knuckles whitened. "Garcia," I said softly, voice almost inaudible over the hammering of my heart. "You see this?" He descended 2 steps, sweeping his light over the folder. "That's Fletcher's file from '96? His voice cracked. "How is that in here?" I shook my head, unsheathing my radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 36. I've located departmental case file Fletcher, August 1996 in freezer storage. Requesting immediate state response. Possible evidence tampering." The static click came almost instantly. "Copy that. Unit 36. State en route. ETA 15 minutes. I exhaled, sweat sliding beneath my collar despite the cold. The basement walls seemed to press inward, and the damp air crawled against my skin. The echo of dripping water grew louder, as though amplified by unseen ears. I returned the freezer latch to its closed position, the metal thud startling in the hush. Garcia exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "There's more than one file in here." He pointed to a stack of folders laid out on a low shelf. May 1994, Jenkins Mary, Deck 1995, Rodriguez Antonio. Sep 1997, Thompson, Lisa. My breath caught again. These were names of neighbors, people who had once lived on this street and never reported missing to us. I knelt and picked up the Jenkins folder, flipping through the pages. They were heavy with redacted paragraphs, scribbled notes in multiple handwritings. One note caught my eye. Follow-up interviews inconclusive. No further leads. Case closed. Closed. Like every other folder had been treated. Closed, buried, forgotten, until now. I replaced the Jenkins file and turned to the storage alcove. The boards we had pried away earlier still leaned against the wall. Beyond them lay that narrow crawl space where the filing cabinet drawers had once lived. I shone my light toward the alcove. "We need to go deeper," I said. "Those drawers, if they're still there, we need to document everything." Garcia inhaled sharply. "You ready?" I checked my magazine, full, and thumbed off safety. Always. Together, we ducked beneath the broken lumber and squeezed into the crawl space. The opening was low. I had to hunch my shoulders and angle my flashlight ahead. The air was thick with the smell of mold, oil, and something faintly metallic, like rusted iron. My boots scraped against uneven concrete as I inched forward. Garcia followed just behind, each of us moving with deliberate slowness to avoid kicking up debris. Our beams illuminated the filing cabinets in succession, rows of gray metal drawers sliding half open. I pressed my back against the cold wall and steadied the beam on the nearest cabinet. A small label reading 1993. I reached out, fingers brushing metal until I found the handle, then slid the drawer all the way open. Inside were rows of manila folders, each bearing a typed case number and name. I lifted one. Parker, Elaine, May 3rd, 1993. I pulled out her file and fanned the pages. There were newspaper clippings about a missing teenager, photocopied maps of the woods, handwritten witness statements. One transcript stood out. Park Ranger Hudson's notes, dated 2 days before Elaine Parker vanished, describing a strange figure seen near the forest edge. The figure's description: tall, hunched, features obscured, walks on all fours. I felt the blade of my flashlight tremble. I jumped as a sudden rumble echoed through the crawlspace, a low vibration that made the concrete beneath me grow restless. It wasn't an aftershock. It felt like a distant footstep, or perhaps the house settling in on itself. Garcia froze beside me, light swinging upward. "What was that?" he whispered. I swallowed. No idea. I signaled for him to stay put and backed out of the crawlspace to retrieve my phone. Above, the basement lights flickered. A strobe effect. I snapped a series of photos: freezer location, case folders, drawer labels. My fingers moved automatically, capturing evidence before the state team arrived. Behind me, the rumble came again, softer but unmistakable. "Garcia," I said, voice low. "We need to get back to higher ground, somewhere we can see more." He nodded. We reversed out of the crawlspace slowly, minding every inch of concrete. Once clear, I stood and surveyed the storage area. The atmosphere was electric, each breath charged with the weight of knowledge. I glanced at the basement stairs leading to the kitchen above, then at the row of cabinets behind us. The rumble came once more, and for an instant, I thought I saw motion, a cabinet drawer rattling as if someone, or something, was just beyond the light's edge. I crossed to the first cabinet and braced myself against it. "State should be here any second," I muttered, straining to see through the gloom. My flashlight beam caught a glint of something reflective on the floor. A small piece of shattered glass, beveled and curved. It lay near a faint smudge of red that bloomed into a drip under the light. I knelt to inspect, heart pounding. The glass wasn't from any household item I recognized. A fragment of Polaroid picture glaze, I realized. The curve matched the freezer Polaroid we'd glimpsed earlier. Someone, or something, had dragged it here. I pocketed the shard in an evidence bag, sealing it with a zip tie. Above us, I heard a distant thump, like a heavy footstep descending the kitchen stairs. Not ours. Water dripped behind me from a rusted pipe. I signaled Garcia and ascended the crawlspace exit first, helping him out. We paused at the broken boards, listening. Silence. Then, unmistakably, the slow creak of a stair tread on the landing above. I pressed my back to the boards, weapon raised. Garcia mirrored me, flashlight sweeping upward. My radio crackled to life. Unit 36. This is State Trooper Mills. We're on site at the front door, awaiting your signal to proceed. I exhaled through clenched teeth. Copy that. Stand by for your entry. I turned to Garcia. They're here. Let's keep them out of the basement until we clear it. He nodded. We arranged the boards back into place, sealing the crawl space as best we could. I checked my watch. 2:45 hours. 30 minutes in the house so far. 5 missing persons files located. Dozens more likely waiting deeper in these shadows. From above, the kitchen door cracked open 1 notch. We heard the state troopers softly announce themselves and step inside, floodlights from their torches sweeping across the hallway. I whispered into the radio, "Proceed to basement entrance." 2 officers inside. Send backup for perimeter. A pair of hoof-like boots clattered on the basement stairs, stumbling over the threshold as the troopers assembled behind me. I switched off my flashlight and raised both hands slightly, then lowered my weapon. My heart hammered, but there was still work to do. I whispered to Garcia, "Stay sharp." He nodded, eyes wide in the glow of our headlamps. We moved back to the freezer, where the folders still lay amidst the boxes. The basement's air felt alive with something unspoken, like the house itself was watching. As the state team fanned out, I watched their torches trace crescent arcs across the damp walls. My gaze lingered on the cabinet drawers we'd emptied, now gaping like open mouths. Beyond them, the crawlspace hummed with unseen energy, waiting. I stayed low in the crawlspace entrance, watching the state troopers fan out into the basement's cavernous expanse. Their helmets and flashlights created shifting patterns of light and shadow across the damp concrete floor. I could see their breath in the cold air, small clouds that drifted like ghosts before dissipating against the low ceiling. Garcia crouched beside me, radio clipped to his vest. He glanced at me through the gap in the boards, eyebrows raised. No words were needed. The trooper leading the entry, a tall woman in dark blue, swept her light across the storage alcove. "Detective Bennett," she called quietly, "can you give us a sit rep?" I slipped out from behind the remnants of the boarding, the wood rough against my shoulders, and knelt beside the freezer. Trooper Mills followed, flashlight trained on the floor. "Found multiple departmental case files behind this freezer," I said, voice low. "Cold cases dating back to 1993. Evidence suggests intentional concealment." I tapped my radio mic. "Dispatch, state is inside. Proceed with securing the scene." Mills acknowledged and directed 2 troopers to mark the perimeter. The others fanned out, moving in methodical patrols, sweeping the basement in overlapping arcs. One of them lit a portable lamp on a tripod near the base of the stairs, illuminating the central area with harsh white light. The sudden contrast swallowed the smaller beams and cast long, jagged shadows against the far walls. I rose to my feet, boots slipping slightly on the moisture-slick concrete, and approached the first row of filing cabinets. The open drawers revealed rows of yellowed folders, each one tagged with a name and date. I followed one label: Jenkins, Mary, May, 1994. I lifted the folder, fingertips brushing brittle edges, and cracked it open. Inside were newspaper clippings, grainy photographs of Mary Jenkins at a county fair, penciled notes about an alleged sighting near the creek behind town, and a transcript from an officer's interview describing a strange, inhuman silhouette. The transcript was stamped, "Closed, no further action." I exhaled sharply. The trooper beside me glanced over her shoulder. "Did you write those notes?" she asked, voice hushed. I shook my head. Someone high up wanted them gone. These were hidden here, behind the freezer, locked away. Her eyes narrowed. She motioned for a partner to bring over evidence markers and bags. As they knelt to collect the Jenkins folder, another trooper climbed the stairs, pale-faced, holding up a small metallic object. He handed it to Mills. A rusted key, bent and pitted. "Key to the padlock on that hidden door," he said, "found near the crawlspace exit." I took the key and held it under the lamp's glow. Its teeth were worn, polished smooth by years of handling. I felt a chill. This key had opened secrets for decades. Beyond the cabinet rows, I saw more frost forming on the rear wall, web-like patterns that glinted in the lamp's harsh beams. I traced the patterns with my gaze until I realized they outlined the shape of more hidden panels, seams in the concrete that didn't belong. I took a step and pressed my palm to the wall. The surface was cold, slick with moisture, but at one seam, it felt slightly raised, an inset panel. I called to Mills and the trooper doing collection work. "Over here," I said, voice tight. She joined me, crouching beside the seam. "That's not just moisture, it's condensation on metal behind this concrete." I dragged my finger along the edge of the panel, then felt the slight outline of a latch mechanism. Mills knelt to inspect. "We need to get this open." She motioned to her partner, who handed her a multi-tool. Sparks flew as she worked the latch, filing away small fragments of concrete. The wall groaned in protest, dust tumbling to the floor. I shone my flashlight over her shoulder. Slowly, the panel swung inward on hidden hinges to reveal a narrow recess, only large enough for a single file drawer. Inside sat a weathered metal drawer unit, its front plate dented labels scraped away. Mills paused, gloved hand hovering. "This changes everything," she murmured. She pulled the drawer open with a creak. Inside were dozens of Polaroid photographs, each neatly stacked. I took one and flipped it over. A hand-scrawled date in faded black ink. November 17th, 1997. The image showed a group of people, teenagers laughing, standing beneath the Pine Ridge Drive sign at twilight. Their faces were clear, but one figure crouched behind them was odd, hunched, limbs elongated, standing on all fours. I pocketed the Polaroid in an evidence bag, my chest tightening. Behind me, footsteps echoed, thud, 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 moving across boxes and debris. I spun around, heart slamming. A trooper's beam swung past me, landing on a rusted filing cabinet. He signaled, wide-eyed, to his partner. They knelt to examine a corner of the cabinet door, where fresh scratches had scraped the paint away, exposing bare metal underneath. "Well," one trooper said, voice barely above a whisper, "someone, or something, was here last night." I swallowed. "Lock it down." I keyed my mic. "Dispatch, state has found concealed recess behind panel. Multiple evidence caches discovered. Recommend full department audit." The static crackled. "Copy that. Roger, 26. Garcia tapped my shoulder, voice low. "Troopers just found a lab notebook. I think they don't want us down here alone." I followed him to a group huddled near the freezer. One trooper held a stained, spiral-bound notebook, pages covered in precise handwriting. I blew dust off the cover. Operation Nightfall. Confidential. My breath caught. Inside were charts and diagrams, site maps, architectural layouts of this very house, notes on personnel rotations, and worrisome annotations in red ink. Names, dates, locations. One entry explained procedures for containment, followed by coordinates. The abandoned mine shafts on the county's northern border. Another was a list of subjects with cage-like cell drawings next to each name. Mary Jenkins, Harold Fletcher, Antonio Rodriguez. And at the bottom, a signature line with a scrawled name, D. Werner. I read the signature aloud. The old chief, Chief Werner, long since retired and rumored to be incompetent. But now I realized he had orchestrated Operation Nightfall himself. I felt the old story unfold before me. Missing persons, closed cases, buried evidence. The notebook was the blueprint for every secret hidden here. As I stepped back, the entire basement felt suddenly smaller, like a cocoon closing in. The walls pulsed with the weight of decades of wrongdoing. The troopers stood still, faces pale in the harsh lamplight, as if afraid to breathe. I flipped the notebook closed and lifted it into an evidence bag, my hands trembling. Behind us, the breaker box flickered. The state troopers' torches scanned the walls again, light dancing across the exposed concrete seams. The rumble came from somewhere deep in the house. Soft at first, then growing louder, like distant thunder rolling across a remote road. The vibration traveled through the floor into my boots, through the walls into my chest. Mills raised her voice above the rumble. "We need to clear this level, secure all evidence and extract victims' families' statements." She motioned to her team, which began carefully bagging files, photographing cabinets, and collecting every fragment of Polaroid, every folder, every page of that lab notebook. I stood by the freezer, flashlight beam steady on the old folder labeled Fletcher, Harold. I thought of every command I'd given that night, the entry code, the Slim Jim procedure, the decision to pull that freezer door open. That single moment had unraveled everything. I swallowed hard. "Garcia," I said, "let's get eyes on the upper floors. Make sure no one's hiding upstairs." He nodded, holstering his weapon. We climbed the stairs in silence, each step echoing like a drumbeat counting down. At the top, the kitchen light swayed dimly. The house was silent except for our boots and the distant hum of police radios from the living room. We entered the kitchen, eyes sweeping every corner. The fluorescent light overhead flickered, buzz, buzz, then steadied. There was no sign of anyone. Dishes were stacked by the sink. The coffee pot sat half full. The mail remained on the counter. Bills, advertisements, a single envelope addressed to Harold Fletcher. I reached for it. The postmark read, October 2011. My chest tightened. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single Polaroid, Harold Fletcher standing on the porch that same night in 1996, smiling, cigarette in hand, eyes bright. On the back, scribbled in faded pen, "Tell no one." My stomach lurched, and the room spun faintly. The buzzing light overhead felt like an interrogation lamp. I snapped the photo into an evidence bag and turned to Garcia. "Something's not right," he said, voice hushed. "These aren't just archives, they're warnings." I pinned the envelope to the bulletin board by the fridge, thumbtack through the corner. The image stared back at me. A man known missing. Alive here just hours ago. From the living room, down the hall, I heard the unmistakable click of a doorknob turning. Footsteps approached the doorway, slow, deliberate, too large for anyone in the house. I drew my weapon and edged forward, Garcia at my side, hearts pounding in tandem. The hallway light flickered off, plunging us into near darkness. Only fragments of the outside street lamp bled through the curtained windows. The hum of the fridge in the kitchen grew loud enough to drown out everything else. Then, in the silence, a whisper. Not from any person, but from the house itself. A faint susurration of voices calling names, floating up from the basement. Faint as a radio transmission on the edge of static. I whispered into Garcia's ear, "Did you hear that?" He nodded, eyes wide. I stepped toward the living room doorway. The whispering grew louder, 9 names, soft and urgent. And in the dark of the hallway, just beyond the edge of the kitchen's failing light, I saw a shape, tall, hunched, crawling on all fours, its outline blurred by shadow. My breathing caught, the world narrowing to that crouched form at the far end of the hall. The house sighed behind me, settling deeper into its secrets, as the whispering crescendoed into a single word. Help. My finger tightened on the trigger. Every nerve in my arm coiled for action. Garcia swallowed audibly beside me. The shape remained crouched at the far hallway's end, silhouetted by the fractured light leaking through the living room curtains. It did not advance. It simply watched. I whispered into my radio, careful to keep the volume low. Unit 36 to dispatch. Unidentified subject in residence. Request immediate escort for non-law enforcement personnel. I repeat, unidentified subject. My heart hammered so loud I feared the radio might pick it up. Static crackled in response. Understood, Unit 36, hold positions. Back up en route. Adrenaline surged as I advanced one cautious step into the hallway, the soles of my boots slick on polished wood. The shape shifted, limbs elongating, elbows bending at angles no human joint should allow. Yet it gave no indication of hostility, only a plaintive stillness. The whispering voices rose again, soft but insistent. Help us. Help us. A brutal gust slammed the kitchen door behind us, rattling the frame. I jerked around, head snapping toward the kitchen light. It flickered violently, then died, leaving us in near total darkness, save for the silver glow of the street lamp through the windows. Garcia's flashlight bobbed as he raised it, beam slicing through the void. I forced myself to speak, voice low and controlled. Identify yourself. We're here to help. The hallway remained silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the erratic patter of rain beyond the windows. The entity, if that's what it was, remained motionless, its head tilting as if listening. I took another step forward, my other hand tented over the flashlight. Each breath echoed painfully in my ears. The figure's shape resolved more clearly. A man-sized being, limbs folded unnaturally beneath it, skin pallid and slick, clothes tattered and soaked. But the face, when lightning flashed outside, was obscured by shadow. Still, I thought I saw a glint of recognition, eyes deep-set, fearful, pleading. Garcia's voice was a harsh whisper. Should we? He motioned toward his radio. I shook my head. Not yet. Let's see what this is. The figure remained still, the whispering rising in timbre to a keening chorus. Goosebumps erupted on my arms. I gave a slight nod to Garcia and edged closer, the boards of the hallway creaking beneath weight. The rain intensified, drums against the roof, a relentless tattoo that seemed to underscore the building tension. Suddenly, the entity shifted. Slowly, deliberately, it pushed off from the floor into a quarter crouch, weight resting on one forearm. The second I saw its face, sunken cheeks, hollow sockets where eyes should be, lips pulled back in a silent scream. Something deep inside me recoiled. Pure, visceral horror. Yet the being did not scream. The voices ceased abruptly, replaced by a single pounding heartbeat echoing in my mind. I staggered back, stumbling over the threshold of the living room. The troopers in the kitchen alarmed, stepping back as the entity advanced on all fours, limbs extending, dragging itself closer with wet, scraping sounds. The wooden floorboards protested under its weight. "Stay calm," I barked to the troopers, voice cracking. "Stand back and cover me." My weapon rose, muzzle pointed at the creature's head. The troopers fanned out, lights trained on the corridor. Garcia, breathing hard, joined their flank. The thing paused at the threshold between hall and living room, hindquarters rising, head tilted like a curious animal. Then, with impossible speed, it propelled itself forward, 8 feet in a blur, landing on its feet in the living room. It turned, tilting its head from side to side as though assessing us. I forced myself to breathe, fingerprints white on the grip of my pistol. "Don't come any closer," I warned. My voice sounded distant to my own ears, muffled by the ringing in my head. The entity cocked its head, skin stretching in a grotesque imitation of a human gesture. It let out a sound, half growl, half whisper, a torn breath that carried the timbre of voices. "Help me, please." A trooper's light illuminated a tear in its shirt. Beneath, pale flesh patterned with long, dark scars. Across its chest, faded ink and spidery lettering spelled, "Fletcher." My blood ran cold. "Harold?" I whispered, doubt warbling through me. My mind raced, the buried files, the hidden room, the secret panel. And now this. The man, if it was the same Harold Fletcher, had been missing for 15 years. Yet here he was, broken and mangled, as if time had twisted him into something else. Before I could process, the entity lurched again, this time toward the troopers who opened fire. Pulses of light erupted, 3 rounds from my sidearm, echoes cracking in the closed space. The creature absorbed the bullets, shoulder bulging where slugs would have torn flesh. It stumbled back but remained upright, unflinching. My throat went dry. "Stop firing," I ordered, even as another trooper unleashed a full magazine from his rifle. The bullets impacted with dull thuds, sending shards of plaster and wood splintering around us. The creature's head whipped toward the noise, eyes, empty sockets, focusing on each muzzle flash. It let out a ragged breath and half ran, half crawled away, back into the hallway, then vanished into darkness. Instinct drove me forward, but strong hands, troublingly gentle, gripped my arms. 2 troopers pulled me back. The hallway fell silent. Only the rain thudded overhead, and soldiers' heavy breathing filled the void. I turned to Garcia. "We can't let it escape," I said, voice hollow. He nodded and radioed for all units to block exits. I advanced alone into the corridor, gun raised. The floorboards were slick with mud-tracked prints, barely visible smear where the entity had touched down. I followed them, each step heavier than the last. They led to the basement door's foot. I froze, recalling where it had started, the frozen file behind the freezer. Behind me, Garcia's light bobbed in the doorway. He whispered, "It's gone back down." I nodded curtly and cleared my throat. "State?" I keyed the mic. "Any sign they've got it contained?" Static, then crushing quiet. "Negative," the dispatcher crackled. "Last tracked on your feed moments ago." I exhaled and glanced up at the ceiling. The breaker box's green light blinked to amber, then died, plunging the house into pitch. Floodlights from upstairs cut away the darkness into 2 shifting beams. A slow drip echoed from below. I signaled Garcia. "We clear the perimeter, geometry control," I said in clipped tones. 6 troopers to cover all entry points. Two of us go down. He exhaled. You first. We descended the stairs, boots crunching plaster. Each step was measured, calculated. We reached the concrete landing. The smell of damp plaster and rust assaulted us again. As our beams swept, I realized the freezer door was closed, just as it had been before. I crept to it and pushed the latch. Inside, only frost and a scattering of ice trays. No folder. I stepped back, heart pounding. Then I heard my own voice. Help! It was quieter now, lost in the hum of a distant police radio. I spun toward the alcove that led to the hidden panel. The boards were intact, undisturbed. I knelt and pressed my palm to the seam. It shifted under my touch. I pried the boards away, revealing the narrow recess and the metal drawer unit. I reached out and pulled the drawer. Empty. Empty. My heart stung. I closed it and pressed my forehead against the cold metal. The silence was suffocating. Then, a soft skittering from deep within the crawlspace. Something small, swift. Garcia shone his light toward the entrance. Rat? No. It moved with unnatural grace down the crawlspace before disappearing, into shadows beneath the cabinets. I rose and scanned the drawers in the open cabinet row. All were closed, except one at the far end, where a faint glow of phosphorescent mold spread at the seams. I crossed to it, hand hovering on the handle. Around me, flashlights clicked on at the bottom of the stairs as more troopers arrived. I took a breath. One final pull. The drawer slid out smoothly, revealing nothing but shards of glass and faint imprints on the metal bottom, shapes that looked like outlines of bodies. My flashlight caught a smear of dust on the underside of the drawer lip. I brushed it away to reveal a single word scratched into the metal. Remember. My chest constricted as the noise outside crescendoed. Boots pounding down the stairs, radios chattering, the hum of floodlights. The house seemed to exhale, collapsing inward, burying its final secret. I followed the flood of state troopers back upstairs, the thud of boots on polished wood echoing like distant thunder. Every step felt weighted by what we had witnessed, and by what we might have missed. In the living room, troopers formed a perimeter around the front door and the hallway entrance to the basement. Their radios crackled with code chatter. Unit 12 to command, perimeter secure. Unit 7 en route to rear exit. Unit 14 holding south window. Behind them, the street lamp's glow pressed through the rain-streaked panes, casting latticework shadows on the carpet. The house felt hollow now, emptied of its buried secrets, yet still cramped with tension. I lowered my weapon, letting the muzzle rest at hip level, and unclipped my radio. Dispatch, I said, voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. Unit 36, we have the scene contained. State is processing. Please advise next steps. Over. Copy, Unit 36. The dispatcher replied after a brief pause. Evidence collection in progress. EMTs on standby outside. Proceed with caution. Maintain crime scene integrity. Command expects your full report by 0500 hours. Over. I acknowledged and clipped the radio back. My gaze drifted to the staircase, where the entity had slithered back into darkness, and then to the adjoining hallway, where the kitchen door swung open and shut in the gale that pressed against the house. Rain lashed the porch, drumming on the glass like an impatient messenger. Garcia approached, panting lightly. His face was drawn in the harsh beam of the portable lamp set in the foyer. You good? He asked quietly, voice tight. I swallowed. Give me a second. He nodded, standing guard as I scanned the living room one more time. The couch still held its neat cover, the coffee table its paperback, the photographs their brittle smiles. But everything felt off, uneven, as if the walls themselves were breathing. I crossed to the mantelpiece and ran my thumb along the edge of a framed photo. Mr. and Mrs. Langdon on their wedding day. From this angle, half the image lay in shadow. I stared until the photograph's surface glittered with the reflection of the lamp. "Detective Bennett," one of the state troopers called. I turned to see Mills standing by the front window, holding a small evidence bag. "We recovered something you might want to see." I moved toward her, boots whispering on the rug. She handed me the bag. Inside lay a single Polaroid, its edges curling. I extracted it carefully. The image showed the living room. This very scene, but empty, undisturbed. Yet across the couch where the paperback sat, a dark smear streaked the fabric. Beneath it, inscribed in what looked like blood, was a single word: home. My lungs tightened. "Where was this taken?" I asked, voice low. "Right here," Mills replied. "Timestamp on the back says 2:51. It was among the items we collected by the fireplace." She pointed to the hearth, charred logs cold and inanimate. "Must have been taken right after you cleared the basement." I stared at the Polaroid, mind racing. The whisper, "Remember," the entity's name scrawl, the folder labels, the broken drawers. Everything pointed here, to this room. I turned it over, searching for more clues on the back. There, faintly written in pencil, "You forgot something." My heart stung. I turned to Garcia. "Check upstairs bedrooms, closets, attics, anywhere else it could be hidden." He nodded and strode off, weapon at the ready. I slipped the Polaroid into an evidence bag and joined Mills by the window. The sky was a sheet of charcoal pierced by street lamp glints. Beyond, the county cruiser's lights rotated, blue and red spinning in the wet night. EMS crews hovered at the driveway, yellow lights painting the porch's edges in caution. The living room lamp above us buzzed, soft but insistent, then stuttered and died, surrendering us to the lanterns and headlamps. I heard my own breath, ragged and shallow. Without thinking, I thumbed off the safety on my service weapon, then realized how I must look. I closed my eyes, steadied my breath. When I opened them, Mills had already lit her tactical flashlight, its beam cutting a knife of white through the gloom. "Better," she murmured. "At least we can see." I nodded. "Let's find anything else hiding upstairs." We moved into the hallway, flashlights bobbing. The wallpaper was the same floral pattern from the bedroom downstairs. Pale petals on a cream background, now stained with age and moisture. The hallway floorboard creaked under each step, announcing our passage to the empty rooms beyond. We reached the first bedroom door, marked with peeling paint. Inside, carpet muffled our footsteps. A single lamp on the nightstand cast a warm circle, its bulb flickering as if buffeted by some unseen breath. I shone my beam over the bed, top sheets draped neatly, clothes folded in a chair, a hardcover book resting by the pillow. I approached and flipped it open, only blank pages. I tilted the light near the spine. This was a hollow cover, its interior empty. "Fabrication," I muttered. Similar to the freezer files, things meant to look normal but hollow inside. Mills swept her beam into the closet. Its bifold doors were ajar. Inside, hangers lined a metal rod, empty except for a single suit jacket. I stepped closer and pulled the jacket free. Beneath it, pale smudges dotting the closet's back wall, handprints, palm-sized and smeared. I knelt, shining my light on one. Faintly embossed in dried residue was a name, Jenkins. Curled handwriting mirrored into the paint. My stomach clenched. "Mary Jenkins again," I said. I radioed Garcia. "Bedroom 1 closet compromised. Smudged prints labeled Jenkins. Check your location." He responded, calm but firm. "Copy." searching room 2. I replaced the jacket and moved toward the next door. Under the transom light, the room beyond looked empty. Just a single mattress on a metal frame, bedding peeled back. I swept the beam across the floor. No prints, no disturbance. The window was closed, latch secured. Yet the sill was wet, droplets beating on the glass. Rain had seeped in. I knelt by the frame and traced a zigzag of footprints on the carpet, bare footprints, toes splayed. I counted 6 steps before they faded under the bed. Heart pounding, I pulled the bed away from the wall. Beneath, I found a stack of Polaroids, face down. I flipped the top one over. A nighttime shot of this very room, empty, but the door behind the mattress was smeared with red. An indicator arrow drawn in pen pointing to one corner. I lifted the rest. Each showed the room from different angles. Empty doorway, soggy mattress, closed window, but always marked with a red arrow at the same corner. I bagged them, tagging each with locations and timestamps. A soft groan drifted from the ceiling above us, like the house sighing, complaining. I looked up to see a small attic access panel set flush in the hallway ceiling. It was closed, paint cracked around its edges. A thin trail of dust led toward it. Mills stepped beside me, beam fixed on the panel. "Of course," she said softly. "They'd want us upstairs too." She drew a screwdriver from her belt, an evidence tool. I pulled out my multi-tool and handed it over. She wedged it into the panel's seam, pried it loose. The panel fell inward with a dull thud, revealing a narrow crawl space and a ladder rung. I assessed it. 4 feet down, the opening led to a plywood floor. I tapped the panel back against the ceiling's lip. "Give me a moment," I whispered. Mills nodded, kneeling to secure the evidence markers around the opening. Through the hush, I heard Garcia's voice at the foot of the stairs. "Room 3 secure." Nothing to report. I raised my hand. "State, Unit 36, I said. "We're going into the attic. Stand by for evidence processing above." Static crackled. "Copy 36, maintain comms." I set my flashlight to its brightest setting and slung my weapon low. Then I climbed the ladder, each rung a careful step. The crawl space was narrow. I had to angle forward. My beam revealed a low-ceilinged attic lined with joists, insulation spilling from between boards, and scattered boxes stenciled with 1204 PRD, archive. I set foot on the planks, the wood groaning slightly underweight. The air was warmer here, thick with dust and the scent of aged paper. I swept my light across the space. Overturned boxes, plastic file totes, and at the far corner, a lone desk. Chairs lay on their sides, and the desk surface bore a single sheet of notebook paper pinned by a blunt tack. I crawled forward and unpinned it. In spidery handwriting was a list of dates and names, some familiar, others not. Next to each name was a checkbox, only a few were marked. At the bottom, scribbled in the margin, "More needed." Beneath the desk lay a tangle of audio cables leading to a battered tape recorder. Its tape was unwound, trailing across the floor and disappearing beneath a stack of folders. My breath caught. I picked up the recorder and examined the spool. Half of the tape was gone. Whoever had recorded here had taken the best part, or the worst. I lifted the folders one by one. April 1998, Thompson, Lisa. January 1999, Rivera, Eduardo. July 2000, Moreno, Carla. My flashlight beam flickered over each, graffiti tags scrawled in red ink across the covers. Unworthy. Hush. Operate. A sudden vibration ran through the floorboards, like a distant vehicle idling too close. I peered through the joists to the ceiling below. A panel of drywall shifted ever so slightly, and soft light spilled in. The hallway lamp had come back on. I heard troopers moving outside the attic hatch. Boots on wood, grunts, murmured orders. I stuffed the tape recorder and the list into evidence bags and secured them to my belt. As I rose, my flashlight caught a reflection on a metal workbench at the opposite wall. A small mirror, oval, its surface cracked. I approached and wiped away cobwebs. The glass showed my face, eyes wide, pale under the lamp's glow. But behind me, in the mirror's reflection, stood a figure hunched, its head bowed, limbs curled beneath it. I spun around, heart leaping, but saw nothing but boxes. When I looked back at the mirror, the figure remained, its outline blurred, a shiver of form shifting on the surface. The whispered chorus rose in my mind again. Help us, help us. I forced myself to step back, wiping sweat from my brow. Every hair on my neck stood at attention. I called up, "Garcia, cover entrance. Don't let anyone, or anything, slip by." My voice cracked but carried up through the attic hatch. He responded with a firm, "Roger that," and I heard the faint click of his radio as he relayed my position to command. I wiped my hands on my trousers and surveyed the attic once more. The boxes marked "Archive" seemed to stretch endless rows back into darkness. Each one begged to be opened, to reveal yet another century-old secret. But I knew better than to be greedy with evidence. I had to preserve the scene. Instead, I traced the tapes trail with my boot, leading to where it vanished beneath the folders. I knelt and pried the folders aside, just enough to glimpse the tape's end wrapped around a pulley. I carefully coiled the free end of the tape back onto the spool, mindful not to erase anything. When the last coil clicked home, the recorder motor stilled, the spool locked in place. I exhaled, wiping sweat from my gloved palms. The storm outside thundered in the gutters, rain battering the roof with relentless urgency. I turned to the attic entrance, ready to descend. One last glance at the mirror caught my eye. In its cracked surface, behind my reflection, a single, pale handprint smudged across the glass, more pronounced than any I had seen. I touched it lightly. The glass felt cold, the smudge sticky beneath my glove. I lowered my arm and met my own gaze, haunted, weary, in the fragment of mirror. The whisper threaded through my thoughts once more. "Help me." I climbed down the ladder into the hallway, the attic's secrets sealed behind me. As I reached the landing, I heard the radio voice of dispatch. "All units, please update status, over." I pressed the mic. "Unit 36, evidence collected from attic. Several compartments opened. Full asset list forthcoming. Over." Static crackled in reply. "Copy 36, continue sweep. Command en route for debrief. Out." I holstered my weapon and turned to Garcia. His fist was clenched on the railing, jaw tight. We exchanged a look that needed no words. The house still held more than we could fathom. Boxes of files, the missing tape segments, corners we had yet to explore. But no matter how many secrets we uncovered, there was one truth I could not ignore. This house, this place, had shaped something monstrous. And that thing was still out there, waiting for someone to remember its name. And I feared it would not rest until we did. We regrouped in the foyer beneath the churning storm outside, rain sluicing down the windows and strobing the room with pulsing light. The state troopers formed a ring around us, their breath misting in the lamplight, faces grim as they rechecked their gear. I could feel my own lungs burning from adrenaline and cold, my uniform damp from the crawl spaces and attic's stale air. Mills approached, holding an evidence bag containing the attic mirror shard and the folded list of names. She spoke quietly, voice tight with tension. "We've logged everything so far. The attic ledger, the mirror, the tape recorder, the cabinet recess. Next is the rear addition, the enclosed sunroom behind the kitchen. She tapped the bag. That smear in the Polaroid. It corresponds with the stain on the far wall of the sunroom. I nodded, voice low. Lead the way. We exited the living room. Ingalls-bomb lights from the exterior flooding the porch and hallway. The back door stood open, rain gusting in like an angry wind, drenching the tiled sunroom's floor. The walls were glass, floor-to-ceiling panes, now water-sheathed and dripping. The hardwood floorboards inside were warped at the edges from decades of seepage. In the center, a rattan chair leaned at an odd angle, cushions torn and soaked. Across the far wall, floral wallpaper peeled in long strips, revealing plaster beneath. On one strip, a dark stain pooled, brown and crusted, flaking at its edges. I approached and knelt beside it, flashlight beams slicing through the dim. The stain was similar in texture to the closet smudge, faint residue beneath layers of varnish. Mills held out a gloved finger. Smells faintly of iron, she said, touching the edge and pulling back. Blood old, could be from the basement files dragging through here. Garcia joined us. Flashlight trained on the corner. He pointed. Look, footprints. Bare, scuffed, leading toward a low panel near the floorboard. I crouched next to him. The footprints were small, possibly size 7 boots, but shoeless. They stopped 2 feet from the panel, curled inward as if someone knelt before it. Mills moved closer, sweeping her light over the panel's seams. Another hidden compartment, she said. I exhaled and drew my service knife, handing it to her. She set to work cutting seam lines, slicing through wallpaper and plaster until the bare wood edges appeared. I kept watch on the surrounding windows, the rain's staccato patter loud in the sudden hush. The seam widened, and then, with a groan of hinges, the panel swung inward to reveal a recessed wall safe, its door ajar. Inside lay a stack of brown envelopes, manila tied shut with faded twine, and atop them a notebook bound in cracked leather. I reached in, careful not to disturb the envelopes, and lifted the notebook. Its cover bore no title, only the initials R.H. stamped in blind letters. I opened it to the first page, where a neat script described the house's construction. Built 1952, basement storage enclosed 1968, attic access sealed 1984, addition completed 1990, original blueprints archived, secondary chamber created 1995. My breath caught. The secondary chamber, another level entirely. I flipped further to find diagrams, floor plans of Pine Ridge Drive houses, including this one. The addition was mapped to the sunroom, indicating an underground extension stretching beneath the lawn. According to the notes, the chamber lay 2 feet below the sunroom's tiled floor, accessible via a trapdoor concealed under a removable floorboard. A crack sounded outside, a tree limb striking the sunroom's glass, jarring me back. I snapped the notebook shut, sliding it into an evidence bag. Mills extracted the leather binding, secured it alongside the mirror shard. "We need to locate that floorboard," I said. "One of us finds the trapdoor, the rest secure the perimeter." Garcia drew a small flashlight and began sweeping the floor near the rattan chair, searching for inconsistencies. He tapped lightly on the floorboards, listening for hollow tones. After several moments, his beam settled on a pale square, a different grain pattern. He pressed down. The board yielded slightly. I knelt next to him and reached for the corner of the panel. It lifted quietly, revealing a metal latch. My heart pounded as I unlipped the latch and pried the board aside. Beneath, a square opening led down into dark void, the edges of the hole stained with age. The smell wafted up, damp earth, rust, and something acrid. I set my flashlight on a floor-mounted bracket, illuminated the opening, and clipped my weapon holster around tight. "State team will need to establish belay lines," I muttered, pulling a coil of yellow evidence tape from my belt. I marked the opening, then looked back at Mills and Garcia. "One at a time. Let's see what's below." Mills nodded, checking her gloves. She tightened the strap on a headlamp, pulled a wire grip ladder from a maintenance kit, and set it into the trap door. The ladder's rungs clanged against the frame. She tapped it solidly before she began her descent. Boots first into the darkness. We held our breath as her form vanished, her lamp flickering down into the hole, illuminating only darkness. I waited, heart in my throat. The descending lamp traced the ladder rails until finally Mills's headshot emerged, her face blank in terror. She squeezed her hand around the rung. "It's a long way down," she said, voice echoing strangely off unseen walls. 20 feet at least, I estimated. "Be careful." Garcia stepped forward, the first trooper to volunteer, and checked the lower rungs, testing their stability. "I'll follow," he said, knotting a safety line around his waist. The rest of the troopers formed a ring around the sunroom's glass walls, rifles slung but ready. I stayed above, offering guidance. "Watch for loose debris. There may be overturned shelving. Keep comms open." Garcia's silhouette shimmered as he climbed down, flashlight trained on the unseen floor. Below, a second, like a shutter, clicked as the trapdoor settled, then silence. My pulse raced as I edged, closer to the opening, shining my beam down the dark throat. Moments felt like hours. The rain drummed on the sunroom's roof, a metronome counting off heartbeats. Finally, Garcia's voice crackled through soft static. "Ground's clear. Low ceiling. Headroom only 4 feet. Feels like a tunnel." I exhaled. "Lead the way, Garcia. I'm right behind." I clipped my belt line to his, knelt, and began descending. The ladder shifted slightly beneath my weight, the metal cool against my palms. The opening closed around me, leaving only Garcia's headlamp moving ahead. My own lamp illuminated the walls, mortar finished stone, damp, slick. The air turned musty and close, like a tomb. The floor beneath the ladder was packed dirt. I stepped off, boots sinking a 1/4 inch into gritty soil. The tunnel sloped downward at a slight pitch. Garcia moved first, his beam sweeping the low passage until we reached a T-junction, a narrower tunnel branching left and right. He flashed his light left. The wall had steel posts embedded at intervals, supports for a chamber. To the right, the tunnel opened into a larger space, a rectangular room perhaps 15 feet across, the ceiling at head height, walls lined with concrete shelving. I moved into the chamber, beam dancing across shapes. Wooden crates stamped "Confidential," a lone desk strewn with files, and at the far end, a metal rack holding glass jars filled with murky liquid. My chest tightened. Garcia whispered from behind, "Holy, look at these jars." I trained the light on them. Each contained unidentifiable organic matter, tissue samples floating in formaldehyde. One jar bore a label: Thompson, Lysa, brain tissue. Another, Rivera, Eduardo, lung section. My stomach clenched. The notebook's school of victims flashed through my mind. I flicked my light toward the crates. They were sealed tight, each welded shut. One bore the stenciled name, Project Nightfall, Phase 2. The desk in the corner was cluttered with loose sheets, diagrams of anatomical cross-sections, scribbled equations, and notes in fine print describing chemical preservation and tissue viability over time. My palms sweated inside my gloves. Garcia moved to the files on the desk and opened one. May 2001, Moreno, Carla. The folder contained a small vial labeled Serum A13 and a note. Administered via subdermal injection. Observe for psychological response. Document hallucinations. I stared at the vial. A small glass cylinder half filled with amber liquid, stopper intact. My mind reeled. The house had been used as a clandestine lab, torture, storage of bodies, experiments on living victims. Footsteps from above rattled the ladder. Mills climbed down next, her face pale and eyes wide. She shone her torch over the shelves and jars, breath hitching. They're all here, every one. I turned to my radio. Command, this is Unit 36. We've located secondary chamber, biological evidence and experimental materials consistent with Project Nightfall. Recommend hazmat and forensic pathology on site immediately. Over. Static crackled. Copy 36. Command en route. Stand by. I slipped the vial into a secondary evidence bag, sealed it with a zip tie, and tagged it. Garcia collected the tissue jars, closing each lid carefully before placing them in labeled crates provided by the troopers. Mills photographed every shelf, capturing the macabre trophies of years of secret experiments. As we worked, the rain's fury receded outside, replaced by distant thunder. The tunnel's echo swallowed our movements. I felt a tremor underfoot, an aftershock, or perhaps the building's skeleton shifting under weight. I glanced at the desk's surface, littered with notebooks and loose pages. Something caught my eye. A schematic detailing a mechanism to seal the chamber. A hydraulic door triggered from the attic. I followed the diagram. A system of levers and pulleys extending from the sunroom's trapdoor, intended to collapse the entrance after closure. That explained the ease with which the trapdoor shifted, and why the attic ladder had felt unusually solid. Whoever designed this planned containment, ensuring no survivors. My blood ran cold, and the enormity of what I'd uncovered pressed in like walls closing in. I felt the weight of every life stolen, every secret buried, every cry for help unheeded by department after department. I looked at Garcia, whose jaw was clenched. Mills pressed a hand to her mouth, as if to stop her own gasps. I realized then that our rescue was incomplete. The secrets of Nightfall extended beyond bodies buried in mines, beyond missing files in freezers, beyond screams in basements. Here, in this subterranean chamber, a perverse ambition had been carried out. Strings of cruelty woven into the very bones of this house. I closed my flashlight, plunging the room into semi-darkness, relieved only by the scattered beams of headlamps. The jars glinted like watchful eyes. The vials gleamed like snakes. The concrete shelving loomed, stacked with years of human material. I placed my hand on the steel shelf and whispered, voice trembling, "I remember you." The chamber seemed to pulse with response. An echo not of sound, but of something deeper. An acknowledgement from the silent witnesses in glass. Then a distant rumble shook the floor, dust falling from the ceiling joists. The ladder above rattled, sending a cascade of small stones and plaster down the shaft. Mills cursed softly. I steadied my flashlight, shining upward, and the tunnel's darkness pulsed with motion. The haunting whisper gathered once more, soft, urgent, overwhelming. "Remember me." The sound filled the chamber, pressed against the walls and jars until I felt breathless. I lifted my radio. "All units, get me out. We're done here." But as I spoke, a loud creak sounded from the tunnel's far left corridor, as if the passage itself was moving, shifting, alive. My blood ran cold. The whisper crescendoed, becoming a chorus. "Remember, remember." I felt the walls lean inward, The jars tremble on the shelves, and the chamber's temperature drop. Rainwater seeped through cracks overhead, dripping onto the crates, hissing in the stagnant air. In that instant, I realized this house would never let us leave with its truth intact. It demanded remembrance, and it would claw at our minds until the final secret was unearthed. I keyed my radio one last time, voice steady despite the quiver in my chest. Unit 36, I will remember every name. And as the whisper echoed off the stone, I understood that memory was the only weapon left, and that I would carry this burden for the rest of my life. The tunnel mouth yawned before us, its inky blackness humming with the echo of that final whisper. Remember. I felt every hair on my arms stand at attention, a shiver of dread racing through my spine. Beside me, Garcia's headlamp bobbed, his shallow breaths rattling in his throat. Mills stood at the chamber's entrance, flashlight trained on the side corridor from which the sound had come. Behind us, the ladder reached upward, our only escape. I pressed my back against the cold concrete wall and took inventory. Evidence sealed and tagged, bodies, tissues, and data secured. Every compartment mapped and logged. Yet, despite our exhaustive work, the house still pulsed with secrets, some alive in that corridor beyond our lights. I clenched my jaw. Let's finish this, I said quietly, voice hoarse but resolute. One last sweep, then we get out. Garcia chimed in over his shoulder. Lead the way. He swept his beam into the corridor. The passage sloped gently upward, the walls slick with condensation. Rusted supports arched overhead at intervals, and small puddles reflected the pale lamp glow like broken mirrors on the dirt floor. Our footsteps stirred grit and mottled drips on the ceiling. The further we advanced, the more oppressive the air became, thicker, laden with the scent of damp clay and old blood. We reached the end of the corridor, where it opened into a low-ceilinged niche carved into the earth. A single filament bulb dangled by a frayed wire, dimly illuminating a metal door set flush into the dirt wall. The door's surface was pitted and scarred, and a rusted wheel handle sat in its center. Surrounding the door were faded warning signs, their words nearly illegible through rust. Authorized personnel only, do not enter, strictly confidential. A chill ran through me. This must have been the deepest chamber, the heart of Project Nightfall. I looked at Mills. Her face was pale, eyes wide in the beam's glow. Beside her, Garcia's grip tightened on his weapon. Our training told us to proceed cautiously. Our instincts screamed to turn back. But we were here, and turning back meant leaving the final truth buried in darkness. I exhaled and stepped forward, weapon lowered but ready. I squeezed the wheel handle, once, twice. It grated on its axle, spitting flakes of rust to the floor. On the third turn, the mechanism engaged with a groan, and the door swung inward to reveal a pitch-black room beyond. The odor that surged out was overwhelming. Stale air, mold, and a coppery tang that set my teeth on edge. I nearly gagged. Mills flicked on her flashlight, sweeping the beam across a vast, rectangular space. My own light followed. The room appeared to be an underground auditorium. Rows of steel-framed benches bolted to the floor, all facing a raised dais at the far end. On the dais stood a podium, its microphone missing, and behind it a stained glass window set into the earth. An odd feature made entirely of textured glass bricks, colored red and amber with cracks spidering across the pane. Between the benches, long troughs lay in the floor, shallow channels filled with a mix of gravel and dried leaves. Their edges were lined with metal plates stained dark. The walls were bare earth reinforced with concrete ribs, and overhead a series of pipes, coiled like serpents, dripping water into open drums at intervals. My pulse thundered as I realized the function of this place. Some grotesque forum where victims had been presented, witnessed, experimented upon, or worse. It was the nexus of atrocity, the point of observation and execution for those captured, concealed behind departmental walls for decades. I stepped forward until the last bench slipped beneath my boots. I ran my gloved hand across the cold metal backrest. It rattled softly. A dark smear on the bench in front, half embedded in the paint, gleamed where my flashlight landed. A fingerprint larger than any we'd seen, smeared in old, oxidized blood. I pressed my palm to it and recoiled at the stain's cold touch, like ice on my skin. Garcia crossed to the podium, his light tracing its edges. Bullet holes pockmarked the surface, and at its base lay shards of porcelain, an intact coffee mug next to a cracked dish. Someone had stood here, spoken into that microphone, spoken commands. My heart sank. Mills ventured closer to the dais, crouching beside a drum that caught drips from overhead. She unscrewed the lid, a hush of air escaped, and revealed a spiral-bound notebook sealed with yellowing tape. She slipped on a glove, pried the tape open, and pulled out the first open page. It was blank, save for a single word scrawled across the center: witness. Underneath, faint indentations suggested subsequent entries had been torn away. She flipped the page, emptied. Another blank page. At the back cover she found a stamp. Department of Crestwood, Confidential Records Disposal. I felt bile rise in my throat. The department had not only hidden files, killed and preserved bodies, but conducted some form of psychological orchestration here. All orchestrated under departmental auspices, with supervisors, phones cut, doors locked, evidence hidden in plain sight. A low rumble shook the earth beneath us, a distant tremor, or the house itself shuddering from the weight of its crimes. The drip from the pipes quickened, as though the building were bleeding. Water pooled in the troughs, rising around the benches. The whisper returned, fracturing the silence. Remember, remember. It started as a tremulous echo, then rippled through the chamber like wind sighing past hollow stones. Around me, the benches rattled. I grasped the podium for support as a deeper voice joined. A chorus of voices, overlapping, sorrowful and insistent. We were here. Do not forget. I dropped to my knees, arms wrapped around my sides. My head throbbed with the weight of memory and guilt. Each name we'd recorded, each folder we'd unearthed, each jar we'd bagged, they all converged in this final chamber. The faces of Mary Jenkins, Harold Fletcher, Antonio Rodriguez, Elaine Parker, Lisa Thompson, Carla Moreno, Eduardo Rivera, they all haunted me. Garcia knelt beside me, voice trembling. We need to get this on record, every detail, transmit as soon as we exit. I nodded, wiping sweat from my brow. Mills, pale as the moonlight flickering through that stained glass window, whispered, We have to close it, seal what's left. She stood and stepped toward the dais, gripping the wheel handle. We can't let anyone else find this. She braced herself and turned the handle backward, the door's mechanism groaning like tortured metal. The door began to swing shut, its edge scraping across the floor's dust and gravel. I rose to help, tugging on the thick metal door as the chorus of whispers crescendoed into a wail. Remember us, remember, remember us. My breaths came in heaving gasps. I forced my legs to move, muscles protesting. With one final push, Mills and I shut the door. It clanged shut, the latch clicking home with a finality that echoed louder than any gunshot. The voices stilled, fading into silence. The chamber fell into darkness, broken only by our flashlights and the drip of water from above. I leaned against the door, heart pounding, sweat cooling on my brow. Garcia placed a hand on my shoulder, solid, reassuring. "Done," I whispered. "It's sealed." Mills secured a heavy chain around the handle and padlocked it, her hands steady despite the tremor in her voice. We placed evidence markers outside. "Do not enter. Sealed evidence chamber." I exhaled, my legs weak as I stepped back. The corridor seemed narrower, the walls closer now that the door closed. The damp air felt lighter, but as if the house itself mourned what had been deprived of the final reckoning. We climbed back up the ladder, each rung a step toward the world above. The attic hatch groaned as we pushed through. The state troopers, some subdued, some still shaken, knew without words that the rescue was incomplete. We had documented, bagged, and sealed, but at the cost of burying the last witness alive. At the top, we paused in the hallway's weak light. Mills locked the attic hatch, dropping the lever with a clang that echoed across the floorboards. The living room lamp flickered on, and the foyer's floodlights illuminated the front windows. I exhaled through clenched teeth, feeling the weight of every secret locked behind us. The house stood silent, its portals closed, its horrors sealed away. Outside, the storm had passed. Rain dripped from the gutters in slow, mournful cadences. The first birds of dawn stirred in the distance, their calls tentative against the quiet aftermath. I reached into my coat and pulled out the last Polaroid, the one marked home. I placed it by the front door's weather strip where it caught the emerging morning light. On the back, I scribbled in bold letters, "They were all here." I snapped the photo into an evidence bag and handed it to a waiting trooper, voice firm. "Make sure this gets entered." Garcia joined me at the steps leading outside. I paused, looking back at the house. Dark windows framed by the fading storm. The morning sky brightened into pale blue, streaked with pink. The world seemed to breathe a new day, unknowing of what lay buried beneath.